Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
It was unusually stuffy in the streets of the noisy city. Suddenly, a huge cloud came out from behind the horizon and covered the sky. Now a zigzag lightning flashed very close by. And then there was a thunderous roar, and the first drops began to fall on the ground. Immediately, the rain fell with an unbelievable noise. Streams of water whipped down the stairs, bending the thin trees to the ground. Linda had no time to hide and ran home, trying to shield herself from the rain with her handbag. In the end, she was soaked to the skin and very cold. She was shivering from the cold. But finally, a house showed around the corner. All the girl dreamed of now was to get warm and drink hot tea. But no sooner had she undressed in the corridor than her mother-in-law jumped up to her. She began to moan and wail, saying, "Where are you going on the floor everywhere? You'll get dirty. You're all wet. Go to the bathroom immediately and wash your hands well. We will bring more contagion to the family from your ward." Linda sighed and excused herself for the 1,000th time. "Mrs. Helen, there's no contagion in the infectious disease ward. It's not a veterinary clinic. There are people just like you in there. What's all this panic? Put the kettle on, please. I'm so tired and cold." But the woman's got a new lease on life. "Yeah, there's no contagion there. Couldn't get a decent job. There's Matthew's friend, the pediatrician's wife, keeping the kids clean. Not like you. You didn't even have the sense to study to be a doctor. You're the only one below you as a cleaner. You make your own tea, not a queen. Come on, hurry up. Matthew will be here soon. What are you going to feed him?" My blood pressure's skyrocketing. I haven't cooked anything. Linda closed herself in the bathroom, switched on the hot water, stood under the shower, and cried bitterly. She was so tired. There was no strength at all. Living with her mother-in-law under the same roof was absolutely unbearable. For her, there was only one favorite person, her son. She revolved around him, and she didn't see Linda at all. Even the news of Linda's pregnancy didn't soften her. All she heard was that there was nothing to be special about, that everyone gave birth and nothing. Toxicosis, throwing up all the time. Lately, her relationship with Matthew had broken down. When she had cleaned herself up, Linda started to prepare dinner. She boiled pasta, fried chops, and cut vegetables for salad. She kept waiting for Matthew to arrive. He did come, but it was almost nighttime. He glanced at his wife and mumbled, "Hello. I'm so tired I'm not hungry," and went into the bedroom. He refused to eat dinner and went to bed. Linda threw the knife into the sink and thought, "Who did I spend 2 hours cooking for? I wonder if all families live like this." Her mother-in-law complained, "What's the matter with Matthew? He's so upset. He didn't even ask me how I was. He didn't eat. What's the matter? Or did you have a fight while I was in the yard?" Linda replied dryly, "No, we didn't have time. He just said hello and went to bed. I don't know what's wrong with him. Ask him in the morning." The woman started up again, determined to vent her anger on her sister-in-law. "What a wife. You don't know what's going on with your husband. Or you do not care. I do not understand. So you can lose your husband if you are not interested in his affairs." The daughter-in-law was so tired that she decided not to continue this unpleasant conversation. She only replied, "Good night to you too, Mum." That night, Linda rolled around for a long time, could not sleep. Her mother-in-law had a point. She and Matthew had become like strangers lately. Common phrases, "Hello, how are you? What will you eat?" A kiss on the cheek, and not always. That's all love is. But it wasn't always like that. I mean, she and Matthew used to be so happy, making plans, sharing everything. When, at what point did it end? And more importantly, why? Linda didn't know the answer to that question. Linda's family was the usual mom, accountant, dad, plumber. Living like everyone else, making ends meet. They weren't poor. Dad's hands were skillful. He often went on part-time jobs to have extra income. The parents loved their only daughter very much, tried to make sure she was well dressed. They took her to different sections. In summer, they went to the river with tents, so the girl remembered her childhood with warm nostalgia as the best carefree time. Since childhood, Linda loved to treat dolls, was interested in medical topics, and dreamed of becoming a doctor when she grew up. Her parents supported her endeavors and persistently saved money for her daughter to enter and study in another city. But trouble came when they were not expecting it. Daddy fell seriously ill. He needed first very complicated surgeries, and then a long rehabilitation. And it all happened just before she entered the university. At the family council, all of them, without collusion, decided that the family savings would be spent on her father's treatment. His life was at stake. And to leave her father in a difficult moment and leave for a long time in another city, Linda simply could not. He was the closest person to her, and she and her mother began to fight for his health. Therefore, no matter how frustrating it was, but instead of university, she decided to enter the medical college in her city on the nursing department. She studied with great desire and enthusiasm. She was not afraid of blood or complicated procedures. Everything came easily to her somehow. And on practice in the department went without fear. She knew how to get along with patients. Boys around the pretty student often hovered around, called her to join their company, and so walked to the cinema or cafe. The girl sometimes went out with her friends, but she was uninterested and bored. Incompetent courtship of inexperienced fiancés only irritated. After graduating from college, she was hired to work in the infectious disease department. Linda found it challenging at first. The patients were mostly heavy, with various, sometimes complicated infectious diseases. They needed special care. But the girl was clever, quickly got used to it. Relations with the team also got better at once. She was appreciated for her diligence and compassion for patients. It was there at work that she met her future husband. He was brought in by ambulance with serious poisoning, and Linda helped him. The guy was sick to his stomach, pale as a sheet, severe dehydration. He kept looking at Linda and asking if he was going to die. He was so sick. Linda promised he'd be fine. She gave him drips, pills, and injections. Soon the guy recovered, joked, and thanked the doctors and Linda for his salvation, and also called the girl an angel in a white coat, showered with compliments. Sympathy between them arose immediately, and then it smoothly grew into love. The guy was older than the bride by 8 years, long ago graduated from university, and tried to start his own business. He was looking for something to do, how to break through and make money. He really had an entrepreneurial spirit. At first he just resold spare parts for cars, and then he was able to open his own repair shop. His fiancée often picked Linda up from work. He gallantly opened the car door, always kissed her tenderly when he met her. All Linda's girlfriends were jealous, and Andy's colleague was delighted. "You're lucky, Linda. You've got such a promising fiancé. When your Matthew gets into the swing of things, you'll be like a cheese and butter, and you won't have to work. Not like my Gregory, who gets drunk with his mates and gets into trouble. And you don't let your happiness slip away and get married." Mom was happy for her daughter, too. Matthew made a good impression on her. He said he loved her, that he would cherish her. But her father was wary of his future son-in-law. He thought that Matthew promised too much, and that he didn't know what would happen in reality. Mr. Justin himself was a man of few words. He had proved his love by deeds, and therefore he did not like to be trifled with. But like any father, he wished his daughter only happiness. He saw her eyes shining, so he didn't interfere with the young people. And Linda herself just worked hard. Unlike her peers who only had parties and entertainment on their minds, Matthew was serious and seemed so reliable. He was all about family. He courted her so beautifully, called her doll and gave her lovely bouquets and gifts, and he kept praising his house and his mum. "I'll invite you to visit. You'll see what kind of vegetable garden Mum keeps. There's nothing there, everything fresh, natural. I hope you like my house. It's spacious and cozy, everything you need for a comfortable life. I expect we'll live there after we get married. I haven't saved up for a separate place, and I don't want to wander around rented flats. It's no big deal if we live with Mum. I'm sure you two will get along, and I'm more comfortable with it. Mum and I are very close. Her blood pressure spikes a lot. I wouldn't want to leave her alone. She'll get sick from all the stress." Linda was worried. At work, she often heard how difficult the relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law can be, but she hoped that this would not happen to her. But she did not want to contradict the groom. The girl loved him very much and was afraid of losing him. Difficulties in their relationship began later, when Matthew introduced the bride to his mother and invited her to dinner at his house. Matthew's mom was upset that her only adored son chose an ordinary nurse as his wife. She wanted her son's wife to be a different girl with a rich dowry, already established in life. Even though Mrs. Helen wasn't an aristocrat herself, she raised her son alone. All her life, though, she'd worked as a shop steward. I suppose that's why she thought herself superior to others. But no matter how Mrs. Helen discouraged her son from getting married, he was adamant and determined. And the celebration did take place. Linda had sensed her latent dislike for the groom's mother when she met her. Mrs. Helen made it clear that she was the only one in the house, and she would have it no other way. When Linda took to help wash the dishes after the feast, the future mother-in-law immediately began to teach her. "Lord, who washes like that? Let me do it. You need to rinse twice, then wipe dry to a squeak and put everything in its place. I can't stand disorder. You young people should be taught everything. You're so clueless." Linda realized it was unlikely that their relationship would ever be warm. But she still believed that in time Matthew's mother would come to terms with their son's choice and her presence in the house, and everything would improve. The future mother-in-law at the wedding still restrained herself, as Linda's parents would not allow her to speak ill of her daughter-in-law. She only grumbled unhappily when she saw her parents' gifts. They'd bought a great set of crockery, beautiful bed linen, and many other things for the family. On behalf of herself, Mrs. Helen gave a card with a tidy sum on the account and proudly informed everyone about it. But Linda never saw the money. Her husband took the card for himself, and when the young couple started living with her, the mother-in-law got even. Matthew had a good house and a nice warm outbuilding in the yard with all the comforts. Mrs. Helen did not even think of moving there and allowing the newlyweds to live separately. On the contrary, she literally went back and forth all the time. She overheard all the conversations, pestered with advice and moralizing. Linda repeatedly asked her husband to rent a flat. She was uncomfortable from the beginning. In this house, you had to follow all the rules of the mother-in-law, and if anything wrong, immediately scandal. But Matthew loved his mother very much and did not want to move out. Matthew was very comfortable. Now he had 2 women taking care of him at once, and it was more comfortable at home. So why complicate his life? Besides, Matthew changed a lot after the wedding. He became very stingy, even greedy. He made a good living. Linda also gave all her salary honestly to the family, but she didn't see any return. Buying a new dress or other things, such as cosmetics, always caused dissatisfaction with her husband and mother-in-law. The 2 of them would start teaching Linda about life. "You're too wasteful. You have a wardrobe full of clothes. Is there nothing to wear? You have to save money, otherwise you can waste it all." It was all her mother's influence, Linda thought. Though she didn't understand where the money in their family went and what it was spent on. Matthew and her mother bought groceries and everything they needed. Linda only cooked, did the laundry, and cleaned up after everyone. After 4 years of living like this, she was getting bored with it. Her father had a second-hand foreign car, and Linda was good at driving. Dad had taught her, and she had her license. But her husband was reluctant to let her drive, only if she had to go to the shop or pick him up from a noisy party. The girl dreamed of having her own car, because to work had to go an hour by bus with a transfer. But her husband and mother-in-law did not want to hear about it. They said there was nothing to be posh about. Linda did not like this attitude towards her. All the more so because before the wedding everything had been quite different. Matthew didn't spare any money on her. He gave her beautiful bouquets. They often went to the cinema or theater or to friends. In the last year, they'd been out on the town for only a handful of times. To tell about all this, parents did not want to tell, so that they did not get upset that her daughter's family life does not go well. Linda was not used to complaining to her friends either. No one would simply not believe her. After all, outwardly, they had a normal family. They lived in prosperity. When Linda found out about her pregnancy, she was very happy. She thought that now everything would change. Her husband would carry her in his arms, and her mother-in-law would be happy that the grandchildren would come and would stop nagging her. But how could it not be so? Matthew didn't take the news with much enthusiasm. He just said, "Well, pregnant is pregnant. I hope it's a boy. I don't want to bother with girls." Her mother-in-law didn't treat her any better either. On the contrary, all said that pregnancy is not a reason to be lazy and forgive everything, and how she herself, being pregnant, even renovated the house, and nothing did not fall apart. Only her parents were happy, congratulating their daughter and looking forward to grandchildren. Matthew had become distant in the last month. He came late, went away on weekends, never told Linda anything, and if she started to question him, he got angry. That's a man's business. They don't concern you. It's your business to cook and run the house. Look at your mother. She works all day long. She never sits down, and she's working in the garden. But don't you have anything else to do but pester your husband with silly questions? But Matthew never forgot his beloved mother, and she hung around her adored son. She waited for him all the time and did not forget to complain about her daughter-in-law. Linda was so sick of it all. She didn't feel happy in her marriage at all. She was like a stranger in this family. Soon Matthew was hurriedly going on a business trip. Linda was very upset because she would have to spend all her evenings with her mother-in-law. It was not a good prospect. All week the girl listened to reproaches and nagging in her address. She stayed late at work twice just to avoid hearing all this. Finally, Matthew was back. Linda missed him so much. She rushed to hug her husband, hurried to show him the ultrasound results, where their baby was clearly visible. But the man only looked at her with tired, sad eyes and gently pulled her away. Nice, let's talk about this later. I'm so tired. I'm going to go to bed from the road. Oh, I almost forgot. There are 2 bags in the back of the car. Take them, I bought you and Mum presents, and go to the shop. Here are the keys. Get some tea, we'll have a family night out. Matthew fell asleep instantly. As soon as his head hit the pillow, Linda sighed and went to the car. She took out a bag of presents and looked inside. It was the same as always, 2 identical neckerchiefs. The girl even had tears of resentment. Only my mother-in-law wears such scarves. I can't stand them, and Matthew knows it. So the gift was bought for Mom and I was just for show. I don't mean anything to him, Linda thought. She gave the gift to her mother-in-law. She got into the car to drive to the shop. The girl was very nervous and, sitting down, accidentally knocked her bag on the floor of the cabin. Linda went under the seat to retrieve the fallen things and fumbled for some strange object. She pulled it out. What was her surprise when she saw a small mini dictaphone for listening? Linda twisted it this way and that, and finally figured out how to switch on the recording. She was driven by pure curiosity. She wondered what the thing was in the car for and who had hidden it there. Suddenly she heard a dialogue between her husband and a girl on the tape. The husband was whispering softly. "Come to me, my darling, come to me. How much I missed you. Oh, how sweet you are, like a candy." Then the laughter of the young lady and the obvious sound of a passionate kiss. Everything inside shattered. Linda couldn't believe it. She listened to the tape several times. Tears covered her eyes, that's what it was. That's what kind of business trip Matthew had been on. Is that why he was so tired, blood pounded in her temples? Linda couldn't remember herself. She rushed back to the house, burst into the bedroom and started pushing her husband, shaking him and shouting, "Get up, you scoundrel, you scoundrel. I hate you. How could you do this to me? I'm carrying your child under my heart. We have a family." Was that girl really worth it? My husband jumped up, rubbing his eyes, unable to understand. Linda, stop. Stop it. What the hell bit you? What are you talking about? His mother-in-law came screaming and stood in the doorway, watching the family scene. Linda turned the tape up to full volume and then shouted, "Not only are you cheating on me, but you left the tape recorder in the car. What, do you listen to this filth at home at night? It's disgusting." Matthew realized he had nothing to say. He's just a mumbler. Do you think I'm an idiot? I don't know who did this to me. And then the mother-in-law entered the arena. She smiled wryly and confessed, "It's very good that you know everything now, Linda. You yourself, son, would never have admitted that you love another woman. I've even met her. Emma's a lawyer, by the way. She owns her own firm. Not like you, Linda. She and Matthew love each other. It's about time you found out. What did you think? Or did you think my little boy was going to be stuck with you forever? He's got a lot of eyes on him. We don't know whose child you're trying to tie my son to. You spend your nights in your hospital doing who knows what. So it's time for you to get out." The man grabbed his head. "Mom, what are you talking about? Who asked you to interfere? Stay out of this." Mrs. Helen hurried away with the words, "All right, you two work it out. I'm doing my best for you, son. You'll thank me when we get rid of this burden." Linda looked at her husband in shock, waiting for an explanation. She still thought it was a mistake, a bad dream. But Matthew mumbled, "Linda, it's just a fling. I have no intention of leaving my family, but it just happened. It's the devil's own fault. Emma's been helping me with my business paperwork. I don't know how I got involved with her. Let's just forget the whole thing. It was a bit of a slip-up. Who doesn't? The girl was shocked by such insolence. She immediately began to pack her things and shouted, "Do you hear yourself? How can I forget such a thing? How can I sleep in the same bed with you now? Trust you at all? You know your mother's right. I've been a stranger here, unhappy in this house from day one. I'm not your maid. Cook, clean, and please Mum. You don't give a damn about me and my wishes and interests. I don't even see my salary. I have to beg for even the most basic necessities. You probably spend more on your mistress. You're not stingy. Goodbye, Shul. We're getting divorced. Go back to your girlfriend and live happily ever after. I hope your mum's happy." Matthew ran after her to the gate, asking for forgiveness. But Linda had already made up her mind she couldn't forgive such a betrayal, and she wasn't going to live in her mother-in-law's house anymore. The husband was angry. "Who needs you? Think about the child. He needs a father. Be aware, if we divorce, I will not recognize him, and on alimony you cannot count on. What money are you going to raise him on? On your penny wage." But she replied firmly, "Nothing, we won't starve. Consider that he is not yours and choke on your alimony. We'll live without you. We don't need a scumbag father like you." Linda drove to her parents' house without thinking. She was shaking all the way. She cried on the bus and did not know how to tell her family. Her father didn't interfere yet. He listened silently, frowning, and Linda sobbed on her mother's shoulder, confusedly telling everything. Everything that had accumulated in her for all these years was pouring out in an avalanche. She had longed to speak out about everything that was troubling her. Mum sighed, comforting Linda. "God, my daughter, why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you say before that you felt bad, that you were so humiliated there? Why did you put up with all these years? My poor girl. I never thought Matthew would turn out to be such a spineless mama's boy and a womanizer. Well, you'll stay with us for a while, calm down, come to your senses, and then we'll see. Maybe things will get better and Matthew will come to his senses and choose a family. But don't go back to your mother-in-law. She won't let you live in peace." Dad fussed and commanded, "Okay, daughter, you've cried, and that's enough. You mustn't be nervous now, you're pregnant. Mother, bring warm milk. Honey is the best remedy for nerves. And you lie down, daughter, drink some milk and sleep. And don't think about that scoundrel. Let him live as he likes. And now we all have to stick together and wait for our grandson. We're with you. You're not alone. Everything will be all right." Linda felt a little better. She hugged her parents and thanked them for understanding her and supporting her in a difficult moment. Now she would definitely not break down. She would make it through. Little by little, Linda was coming round. Matthew tried to call several times, but she didn't answer the phone. At work, her colleagues didn't understand her and discouraged her from getting divorced. They said, "Linda, don't be daft. What are you doing? Well, your Matthew had a fling once. It happens. It's not like he's pushing for a divorce. Where else are you going to find a man like that? He doesn't drink. He doesn't hit. He's a hard worker. He's got money. And the baby needs a father. Well, you showed character. Good for you. Forgive him and move on." But Linda couldn't and didn't want to. She was so calm, so happy in her parents' flat. No one nagged her anymore. No one tried to teach her about life. In the evenings, her mother waited for her from work. They had dinner together, shared the news. Her exhausted nervous system slowly came to order. A week later, a respectable, young, pleasant man came to her workplace. He introduced himself. "Hello, Linda. My name is Nicholas Brown. I'm a colleague of your husband's. You see, I put a tape recorder in his car, and I've unwittingly caused your divorce. I'm sorry, that's not the outcome I was hoping for. And I'll tell you, you ruined the whole scheme when you found him early." Linda sat down on a chair, started asking questions. "Well, you know, Nicholas, maybe it's a good thing that I found your device. Otherwise, I'd be living a lie. What I don't understand is, why did you plan it? Were you interested in Matthew's affairs?" The man shook his head. "That's the least you've learnt, Linda. Your husband is full of surprises. I'll start at the beginning so you'll understand. I had a brother, Ben, only 3 years older. When we were kids, we were thick as thieves. We were thick as thieves. He became a cop. It was his childhood dream. I went to school for economics. 2 years ago, Ben worked on a case He and his operatives were working on a smuggler who was illegally transporting and trading precious metals abroad. He had a small car repair shop and a used foreign car for diversion. He lived modestly. No one even guessed that, in fact, he was almost a millionaire. His business was dirty with gangsters. Now, Linda, this smuggler turned out to be your husband, Matthew Schull. I'm sure you had no idea, did you? Linda was shocked and struggled to find the words. Wait a minute. But there must be some kind of mistake. Although if it's true, then this scoundrel was taking my salary for family expenses, and he was running around with mistresses somewhere. I realized I didn't know the man I'd been married to for 4 years. Just in my head, all this does not fit. Nicholas continued, when my brother got too close to Schull and was ready to take down his criminal gang, he was suddenly hit by a tinted car with hidden license plates. I'm sure it wasn't your husband. He probably hired someone to take Ben out. I swore on my brother's grave that I would see this through. This is for his death. I took a job with your husband as purchasing manager. I'm a cop myself. I'm undercover now, so I planted that tape recorder. I was hoping to find out something important about the case. Now I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get into Schull's files. I'm sure he keeps his secret books somewhere safe. In the mind of an aggrieved Linda, she immediately plotted her revenge. So she came up with one. I'll help you. I really want that bastard to answer for everything. I know the code to the husband's safe, and I can photograph all the documents. I hope that'll help you. I'll go today. I still haven't got all my things. The man waved his hands in the air. No, Linda, that won't do. I know you're in your condition, and I don't want you to take any chances because of me. You don't want any trouble or stress right now. So I'll just have to do this on my own. All right, I'm gonna go. Here's my card just in case. Don't despair, it'll all work out. You're young, you'll be a mom soon. It's gonna be a whole new happy life. Linda wouldn't listen. She took a day off work. It was important to her that Matthew wasn't home, and at a time like this, he's definitely at work. She would distract her mother-in-law somehow. The girl was very worried, felt like a spy, and took a taxi to her mother-in-law's house. She met her unfriendly. Oh, why did you come? You're getting a divorce. There's nothing for you to do here now. Linda, not the least bit frightened, replied, Good afternoon to you too, Mrs. Helen. Don't worry. I'm not going to live with you anymore. And I'm not going to put up with Matthew either. I'm just going to get my things. Her mother-in-law didn't look at her kindly, but she let her pass and literally followed her around, making sure her daughter-in-law didn't take anything she didn't think she needed. Linda was nervous, for she had to find her husband's papers. Finally, she was in luck. Her mother-in-law's mobile phone rang, and she went to her room to talk. Linda rushed into her husband's office, dialed the code of the safe, and pulled out a pile of papers with shaking hands. Just then she heard footsteps down the corridor. Her heart sank into her heels. Blood rushed to her head. She realized that she wouldn't have time to take a picture of the documents, so she simply slipped them into her pocket and shut the safe door quietly. And then she made a deliberately loud fuss and moved the chair. My mother-in-law immediately burst into the office. What are you looking for? You certainly didn't leave your things here. Linda tried to answer calmly. An earring. Matthew and I had a little spree here a while back. Maybe this is where I dropped it. There it is. Thank goodness. That's it. I'll be off now. Goodbye, Mrs. Helen. I hope your next daughter-in-law will be more to your liking. Though with your insufferable temper, I don't think that's likely. The mother-in-law sang angrily, Go away. And don't give me a hard time, you cad. Linda walked out of the gate and sighed with relief. I did it. Well, hang in there, Matthew. I hope Nicholas brings you to justice. And you'll be held to account. She phoned him in the taxi and told him cheerfully, I've got it all. Where are we meeting? Okay, I'll be at the meeting in an hour. Linda spotted him from a distance. Handsome, trim and fit. You can't help but admire him. She approached the man, said hello, and started pulling out her ID from her purse. And then the unbelievable happened. 3 policemen jumped out of the car behind her. They rounded up both Linda and Nicholas. They said, Mrs. Linda Schull, you're accused of stealing your husband Matthew Schull's identity. So come with us to the station. We'll sort it all out. Linda was very frightened and cried. She berated herself. How did they find me? What's going to happen now? I'll probably go to jail. What a fool. What was I thinking? How scary. The thing is, she had no idea what it was really like and how cunning her mother-in-law was. When Linda came to collect her things, Mrs. Helen suspected something was wrong. The woman followed Linda discreetly, and when she started to open her son's safe, she filmed everything on her phone, hiding behind the door. She immediately sent it all to her son, and he ran to the police and filed a report. And to calculate Linda's whereabouts on the phone number in general was easy, so the woman got caught. It was hot in the station. Linda cried, apologized, tried to justify herself. "I'm not a thief, I've never taken anything. It's just that my husband betrayed me, cheated on me. And today I found out he's been leading a double life all these years. He's a smuggler. Nicholas told me, so I decided to expose him. He has to answer for what he's done. Oh, Mommy, I feel sick. Where's the loo? I feel sick. I'm pregnant." The policemen looked at each other, but still took the dead knee to the toilet. Linda didn't come out for a while. Pale as a sheet, exhausted. She'd been sick to her stomach for half an hour. The coroner thought to himself, she doesn't look like she's faking, but she's bad, and she doesn't look like a thief. More like a woman confused, so he made a mess of things. Jealousy can do a lot of things. Sometimes it even goes as far as murder. We need to nail this Nicholas and find out what he's all about. What if he's her lover? What if they're in cahoots? Nicholas was terribly angry and thought to himself, well, I told you not to get involved in anything. No, she still stuck her nose in and ruined everything for me again. What a willful and stubborn girl. I'm going to have to lay it all on the line. There's no other way. Otherwise, Linda's stupidity will really get her in trouble. The man told the station who he really was, and that Linda had nothing to do with it, just wanted to help. And it all turned out so stupid. He spoke passionately. Did you even look at the paperwork? Schull is a criminal, and he's breaking every law in the book. He drove my brother to his grave, and he's just going to get away with it. When the investigator read it all, he whistled. Wow, that's some serious dirt. You should thank your girlfriend. She worked so hard for you. Well, now we can reopen the case. And here I was thinking Schull was begging me to give him the file right away. And I promised him I would. But now things have changed. By the way, I think it's time to let the girl go. I think 3 hours in a cell will teach her not to do that again. Linda was finally released. She felt so bad that she just sat down on a bench outside the station and pondered where she could find the strength to get home. This horrible day seemed endless to her. Just then, Nicholas called out to her. Well, homegrown detective? Let's go. I'll take you home. Tell me, why did you get involved in this case? I told you not to do anything. Suddenly, the woman couldn't take it anymore and burst into loud, childish tears. I wanted to help. And you're scolding me? Nicholas realized he'd overreacted. He sat down beside her, took her shyly by the hand, and began to comfort her. I'm sorry, Linda. I know you meant well. But now you realize how risky it was. You don't know your husband at all. He's a dangerous man. So get a quick divorce and start a new life. And know that you're not alone. I'll always be here for you. I'll help you, I'll support you. All right, don't cry. You can't. Get in the car. Let's go. It's nighttime. My parents must be worried. Linda didn't realize she'd fallen asleep on the way. She just closed her eyes and fell into darkness. And Nicholas looked at her, so defenseless. Her hair was mussed, her cheeks were burning, and her heart ached. He wanted to keep this naive, frightened girl close to him, to protect her from hurt and harm. He had never felt such amazing feelings for anyone. He wondered at himself. He carefully took Linda in his arms and carried her gently into the flat. His parents only wanted to make a fuss, but he put his finger to his lips and said quietly, Hush, I'll explain everything later. She's had a very difficult day. Let her sleep, she needs it now. Mrs. Rachel suggested. Thank you, Nicholas, for giving my daughter a lift. Why don't you have some tea? We could get to know each other. I'm just about to have some cottage cheese. Nicholas's stomach rumbled. He remembered he hadn't eaten in a long time and agreed. He had a long chat with Mrs. Rachel and Mr. Justin. He devoured the still warm pastries with gusto. It was as cozy as home in that hospitable house. From that day on, Nicholas visited Linda often. He helped her with her divorce and supported her in every way possible. They talked and walked a lot, and did not notice how they fell in love with each other. Now Nicholas understood what it means to love the soul without touching the body. They felt so good, so easy and relaxed together, as if they had known each other for 100 years. Matthew called Linda several more times, insulting her, shouting into the phone. You snake. You got mixed up with the cops and decided to go against me. I will destroy you. I bet you've been going out with him a long time. I bet he got you pregnant, too, didn't he? My mother was right. She saw right through you. You'll pay for the trouble you've caused me. Nicholas blocked Matthew from Linda's phone, picked her up and dropped her off every day. He never left her alone for a minute. He reassured her. Don't worry, Matthew will soon be in trouble himself. No amount of big-name lawyers will help. He's the one in agony, realizing the end is near. Nicholas was absolutely right. Matthew had spent huge sums of money on lawyers, on getting bail before the trial. The clandestine illegal business had to be shut down in a hurry. The official business was bursting at the seams. The man was hastily withdrawing all the money from his accounts. Many of them were already blocked. The investigator was digging deep, stepping on his heels, and Matthew was getting cold feet. He didn't want to go to jail at all, so he decided to run. He'd had fake documents for a rainy day for a long time. The family had fallen apart. His mistress, smelling danger, broke up with him immediately. She didn't want any trouble, and his mom was harassing him day and night. Matthew, my son, you've been walking around like a man in water, not eating at all. Is it the divorce that's got you so upset? Forget that nurse, you'll find yourself a better woman. You've got a very smart fiancée, Emma. She's got business acumen. I like her a lot. Have you forgotten all about Mom? No interest in my health. My blood pressure's off the charts from nerves. I'm about to go into bed. These conversations pissed him off. On the one hand, he was very angry at his ex-wife. His male ego was hurt, because he was absolutely sure that Linda adores him, will forgive him this stupid affair on the side in return. But on the other hand, he desperately missed her affection and warmth. When she was around, he didn't notice it at all. But when he was alone, it became so nauseating, even howl. The man was angry. Mother, leave me alone. I don't have time for you now. And don't go to Emma's again. We broke up. I have to go away for a long time. The police will come. You can tell them you don't know anything. I won't be able to call or write for a while. I've got to get away before it's too late. But Matthew didn't get far. He was picked up at the airport with someone else's documents in his hands, and he went to prison. Friends and former colleagues immediately turned away, so as not to get dirty in this dirty business themselves. The man was desperate. He was given 10 years for illegal manipulation of money and jewelry. And the prison life began. A cramped, stuffy cell, a cloudy, unwashed window with bars, through which almost no light came in. Iron bunks with bad-smelling mattresses and hardened convicts. It was damp and gloomy, and the door with the feeding trough, like a bone to the dogs, was killing. Matthew fell into a deep despondency and ennui. He often remembered Linda, her warm smile and gentle hands, her care, and he wondered to himself, my God, how could I not have noticed all this before? I took everything for granted, obeyed my mom, didn't respect my wife, didn't appreciate her. That's what I lacked. Why did I get mixed up with Emma? Why didn't I give up my shady dealings when I got married? I kept saving those damn millions, hiding it from everyone. And for who? What for? It's like I was writing a draft. My baby's probably already born. I wonder if I married that guy. Will my son or daughter call him daddy? And I'll always be a stranger to my child. A nobody. Periods of depression and longing were replaced by anger and even hatred towards his ex-wife. Matthew was determined that he would meet her when he got out, and she would let him see his child. That was the only thing that kept him warm. Over time, it became an obsession. His mother wrote him long letters and sometimes sent him parcels. But Matthew didn't answer them directly. He blamed his mother for all his troubles, too. He thought she had driven Linda to the point where she had left him for good. One thing the man never understood, the most important, that the culprit of everything that happened to him, he himself, and no one else. At Linda, on the contrary, life slowly began to improve. Nicholas Brown offered her hand and heart, and they moved to live in his flat. Parents were happy for their daughter, saw how the guy sincerely loved and cared for her. The girl, of course, worried whether Nicholas could love her baby. After all, the heart cannot command. Suddenly tired of all the troubles and sleepless nights, she would have to go through a painful breakup again. She even cried at night, secretly into her pillow, tormented by these bad thoughts. But her fears were in vain. Nicholas, together with her, went to the courses of young parents, learning to swaddle. And when her beloved was taken to the hospital, he could not find a place. He calmed down only when he was allowed to Linda in the room. He immediately took the baby in his arms and timidly stroked the baby on the cheeks, saying, "Here we are, our son is born. How small, so defenseless. But nothing, Daddy, is near. When you grow up, we'll play football together, go fishing. I'll teach you how to drive. In the meantime, eat well and grow up healthy." Linda cried and laughed at the same time. It was so touching. "Thank you for everything, Nicholas. I'm the happiest I've ever run in. Honestly, can you believe it? I didn't even know men could love like that. I'm so glad we met. What shall we name the baby?" The man got serious and proposed. "I'd like him to be called Ben, like my brother. If you don't mind, of course." "Thank you, sweetheart. I didn't know I could fall in love like this. My family is the most important thing in my life, and I'm glad you let me be a part of it." Nicholas arrived with balloons and flowers and all the family. Linda gasped when she looked out the window. There were parents on both sides and friends waiting for her in the courtyard of the maternity hospital. Everyone was sincerely congratulating, wishing Mummy and baby happiness and health. The nurse, giving the baby to Nicholas, joked, "Well, Daddy, congratulations. Don't delay while you are young. Come back for the second one." Too, her words proved prophetic, and a year later Linda gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Nancy, in the same maternity hospital, surprised the whole family. And Linda herself did not immediately realize that she was pregnant. She couldn't wait for her cycle to get better. Her breasts were already sore from too much milk and nursing, and the lower abdomen was pulling. And only when the baby began to push in her belly, everything became clear. The woman was even frightened. How will she be able to manage such small children? But Nicholas was very happy and assured her that he would be the first assistant and together they would manage. He spoke eagerly. "I understand your anxiety. You're probably afraid that I'll love my child more. No, I'm not. Get it through your head they're my two children. That's how I see it. A son and a daughter. And I'm going to love them exactly the same. But it'll be great for the kids to grow up together. They'll be good friends. It'll be hard at first. But then when the kids grow up, they'll be the closest people, like me and my brother. The closest person I've ever had." Linda was completely absorbed in motherhood, even though it wasn't easy at first. Babies are small, capricious, a lot of trouble. But Nicholas helped her in everything and bathed and babysit children as well as Mom. And the parents were on the catch, gladly took the kids for a while, giving the opportunity for young parents to sleep and spend time together. Time flies imperceptibly. First steps, kindergarten. The children have already gone to the first grade. It was so exciting. Nicholas proudly filmed everything, and Linda cried quietly when Ben and Nancy read poems. The woman was still working in the infectious disease department, and one day an elderly heavy patient was brought in. She was severely poisoned. She wanted to commit suicide and drank a vegetable garden treatment on purpose. They barely saved her. She was on the verge of death for 3 days. Linda had just come on shift and her partner was handing her cases. "We've got a suicidal woman. We had to keep an eye on her. We barely got her out of there, or she'd be up to something else. And then you'll have to answer to us. Let the police and psychologists deal with her." Linda started taking pills and thermometers to the wards and went into room 5. And when the old woman turned her head, she gasped. It was her estranged mother-in-law, Mrs. Helen, but she was simply unrecognizable. Just a shadow, impossible to look at. Linda even wanted to leave. I didn't want to talk to her, but she quickly put her foot down. After all, she is a medic, so she must help everyone without exception. Linda exhaled and said, "Good afternoon, Mrs. Helen, you recognize me, don't you? I can see it in your eyes. Take a thermometer. We're going to take your temperature. What happened to you? Why did you drink the poison? What if it hadn't been pumped out?" Mrs. Helen replied hoarsely, "I might have wished they hadn't. Why would I want a life like that? My son got out on parole and disappeared somewhere, never came home, left his mother. I have a serious, almost fatal illness, and I'm alone. No one to even give me a glass of water. Now that we've met, I want to tell you this. I'm sorry for everything. Did I break up your marriage with Matthew? I always thought you weren't worthy of my son. It wasn't until I was dying that I realized it. It was only then that I realized what I'd done. I beg you to let me see my grandson at least once. Did I hear you have a son with Matthew? I don't have long to live. That's all I ask. I won't hurt anyone else. I swear it." Linda shook her head, sitting down next to me on the chair. "I'm sorry that this happened to you, and I don't hold a grudge. On the contrary, I'm grateful now, I guess. After all, If not for the divorce with your son, I would never have met my soulmate and would not have learnt what is a real woman's happiness. I'm sorry, but I won't be introducing my baby to you. He has a different father, different grandparents, and I'm not going to traumatize him. I can only show you a photo on my phone. There, you see, that's your grandson. And this is Nancy, my daughter. She's a first grader. Mrs. Helen kept staring at the photo. A tear rolled down her cheek. She mumbled, "Wow, he looks just like Matthew when he was a kid. The mole above his eyebrow is the same. And his curls, he's all grown up now." Linda put the phone away, took the thermometer and replied dryly, "I have to go. You get better here." Mrs. Helen pleaded, "Linda, I'm sorry for everything, you old fool. Have mercy on me. Let me hold my grandson before I die." The nurse shook her head in denial and left the room. She was seething with anger and resentment. She decided to remember her grandchildren, I thought. And she herself used to shout that I'd had a baby. She chased the child out of the house. Serves her right. Now she's paying for all her sins. She told Nicholas and her mum. She rang with outrage. She thought her family would be supportive and understanding, but she was wrong. Mum didn't agree with Linda. "Daughter, I understand. These people have caused you a lot of harm, and you, of course, have the right to cut them out of your life. But look on the bright side. Chill out. Mrs. Helen's been punished enough as it is. She's been abandoned by her own son, and she's gravely ill. Just think how desperate you'd have to be to commit suicide in such a savage way. Mrs. Helen is her own grandmother, even if she's not the best. It is not necessary to tell the child everything. He is too young to understand the despicable deeds of adults. But it is not difficult to let your grandmother hug your grandson. For you it will be a huge victory over yourself. Forgiving an enemy is always incredibly difficult. Just a few minutes, and Mrs. Helen will be happy. Think about it." Nicholas said that whatever Linda decides, that's what will happen. And he promised to support her in any way he could. He understood his wife as well as anyone. It was tantamount to being told to take shul and forgive him. There was no way he could do that. Did you have to deal with Mrs. Helen on shift? She never asked her for anything else. She didn't talk at all. She just lay there with her back turned to the wall. She wouldn't eat either. She seemed to really want to die quickly. The doctor lamented, "Pity the old woman, she's not fighting at all." The symptoms of the poisoning have, of course, been treated. Now it remains to cure the severe burn of the mucous membrane of the stomach and intestines. But it is obvious that the patient is deeply depressed and does not want to live. She's all alone. It's been a fortnight since anyone's visited her. If this keeps up, we'll have to move her to another ward. We can't do anything. Something in Linda's soul trembled. She thought, what am I, some kind of insensitive log? A man is dying, and I don't even care. Mum's right. It can't be like this. We're human beings. We should be able to forgive and be compassionate. For Mrs. Helen, hours, minutes, and days of the week had long since merged into one. She did not understand why she had been brought back to life, why she had to return to a cold, empty house, where no one was waiting for her and no one needed her. It was simply unbearable. Her grandson was her only family member, but Linda had given up all hope of ever seeing him again. The door to the room opened quietly, but Mrs. Helen didn't even turn her head. She didn't care who was behind that door. Suddenly she heard a soft child's voice. "Mummy, is this the grandmother we came to see? Is she asleep?" The old woman's heart leapt into her heels. She immediately jumped out of bed, fixing her hair, and kept looking at the cute-cheeked kid in a tracksuit and bright trainers. It was as if she'd seen Matthew's son as a child. Then she held out a dry palm and said, "Hi, mate. Thank you for coming to visit. My name is Grandma Helen." The boy held out the package in embarrassment. "I know my mom told me that when Grandma was sick and sad, so she and I decided to come and visit you. Here are some presents. I know how to cheer you up. I always want to draw when I'm sad or in a bad mood. And Nancy likes to draw too. She and I draw together, and it's a lot more fun. Would you like me to show you a game? I'll start drawing, and you keep drawing, and then I'll do it again, and we'll guess what comes out. It's very funny. My mom taught me." Mrs. Helen could hardly contain her tears of happiness. She wanted to hug her grandson tightly, to kiss him, to hold him close, but she was afraid she would frighten the baby, so she replied cheerfully, "Well, let's try. I'll go first. What does it look like?" They were so engrossed that they didn't even notice an hour had passed. The baby had settled in and was chatting away, asking his new grandmother about everything. "And you are great at drawing. The kitten is so beautiful. Can you bake cakes?" Mrs. Rachel's grandmother only knows how to make cottage cheese pancakes. "That's what my little sister likes to make. I like cherry pies. Do you want to bring Nancy along next time? She'll cheer you up in no time. She makes these faces. She'll make you laugh." Mrs. Helen answered cheerfully, "I promise. As soon as I'm well enough, I'll make you and your sister cherry pies, and I'll be glad to meet you. So you come and visit me more often. Okay? I'd be very happy to." Linda sat quietly in her chair and realized what a good thing she had done. Mrs. Helen's eyes lit up as if they were alive, and Linda felt better. She asked her former mother-in-law not to tell the child that she was his own grandmother. "Let him grow up. He thinks Nicholas is daddy. When he's older, we'll see. In the meantime, let things be as they are." From that day on, Mrs. Helen recovered very quickly. She was so happy every second she spent with her grandson she couldn't breathe. She was soon discharged from hospital. Although the doctors gave her only a couple of months to live with a diagnosis, Mrs. Helen overturned that verdict. The doctors gave up, but the woman still lived and rejoiced every day. After all, now she had a reason to live. Linda thanked her mother for telling her how to do the right thing. The resentment and hatred gradually left her heart. After all the bad things were in the past. She has found her happiness. She has a marvelous husband and 2 wonderful children, and the family is good. And Mrs. Helen's changed a lot. She'd really realized everything and was a very different person now, kind and calm. So why deprive her of the joy of spending time with her grandson? It's ridiculous. Every night, snuggled up to her beloved husband, Linda smiled and fell asleep completely happy. The autumn wind swirled the fallen leaves as if cradling them in its arms. Lexi walked down the street, passing noisy avenues and gray high-rises. The wind ruffled her brown hair, making it tangle in her thin wool jacket. The heels of her shoes clattered on the wet asphalt, beating a rhythm of anxiety in her heart. Each step was hard to take, for ahead of her lay the trial, the divorce, the fight for justice in the memory of the man who had become her family, Edward, her husband's father. Lexi tried not to think about what awaited her in the courtroom. She knew that Edward and his overbearing mother would stop at nothing to disinherit her. So she knew they would lie and accuse her of all the deadly sins. Finally, Lexi hesitantly stopped at the entrance to the building. The heavy oak doors with massive metal handles creaked open, letting her guest into a rather gloomy long hallway. Lexi took a deep breath, trying to deal with the rising panic. There was a tense silence in the hall, interrupted only by the quiet whispers of lawyers counseling their clients. Lexi, as if mesmerized, walked to her seat, passing the tables littered with papers. It was then that she saw Edward and his mother. Her husband looked glum and tense, his face contorted with anger. Janie, on the other hand, radiated cold confidence. Her lips were pressed into a thin line and her eyes were full of contempt. Next to them sat a woman Lexi recognized immediately, Isabel Korshunova, the photo model and Edward's lover. Her bouffant blonde hair, bright makeup, and provocative dress contrasted sharply with the strict and formal courtroom attire. At that moment, Lexi remembered how she had once caught Edward in Isabel's arms in their living room when she had returned from work late one evening after a long surgery. Tears filled her eyes. Her soul was torn apart. Edward explained to her, as if nothing had happened, in a tone that brooked no objection, that he had long since fallen out of love with her, and now he had a new lady of the heart. Those words, like shards of broken glass, cut into her heart forever, leaving a deep, unhealing wound. Lexi felt a wave of uneasy shivers run down her spine as she met her eyes with her ex-husband. Edward grinned and said in a half voice, "Look for your inheritance in the dump. You'll get nothing here." She was taken aback and froze in place. Naomi said quietly, "Attorney Bob, please come to the table." Lexi obediently sat down and immediately felt the stares of those present, as if she were not a person but a museum piece. At the hearing as the dissolution of the marriage between Lexi Smith and Edward Reshetnikoff, the judge began, as well as the division of the property left behind by the late Edward Reshetnikoff, specifically his business and land located within the city limits. The judge's voice was even, expressing neither sympathy nor condemnation. "Your Honor," Edward's attorney said, "we believe Lexi Smith is not entitled to the inheritance." "Why not entitled?" Lexi couldn't help herself. "Because M. Smith," the lawyer continued and pointed at Lexi with an accusing gesture, "performed a botched surgery on her father-in-law, Edward, and it was her actions that caused my client's father's conditions, or his interior." "That's a lie," Lexi exclaimed. "Edward had been sick for a long time, and I did everything I could to save him." "Stop playing with words, dearie," Janie said, and looked at her with disdain. "You know perfectly well your interest in the operation was not so much medical as self-serving." "What are you saying, I eliminated my father-in-law for money?" Lexi asked. "Exactly," Edward confirmed. Mahaley, frowning, asked, "Lexi, can you provide medical documentation to support the claim that you did everything you could?" "Of course. After all, it's been at least 6 months since the surgery I had. And if I'd done anything wrong, Edward wouldn't have lasted 24 hours, Lexi replied. An indignant murmur ran through the room. Immediately after her words, the lawyer handed the judge a folder of medical documents. The judge studied the documents, then raised his head and looked at her. "Lexi," the judge continued, "everything in these documents looks quite credible, but there is one but. It is a doctor's ethical obligation to inform the patient of all the risks of the surgery, and that, although successful, if the patient has comorbidities, it is not always possible to avoid the risk of complications that could later cause Edward's death. Have you informed him of this?" "Yes, Your Honor," Lexi replied. "I explained everything to Edward in detail, all the risks. And he still agreed to the surgery, even though he knew that every doctor in town refused to perform it," the judge clarified. "Yes," Lexi replied quietly. "Edward was well aware that he had no choice, especially since the surgery gave him another 6 months to live, and in his position, that was no small thing." "Please provide evidence for your claim," the judge said. "Your Honor," Lexi's attorney interjected. "As evidence, we are going to introduce an audio recording of a conversation between Lexi and Edward, where my client talks about all the risks and getting consent." "Okay, let's listen to that recording." And there was silence in the room, and soon the conversation was replayed. Lexi's voice sounded calm and confident as she explained the specifics of the disease and the possible risks of the surgery. Edward listened attentively, asking questions that Lexi readily explained. At the end, his calm, confident voice said, "I understand, Lexi, and I trust you. But do whatever you think is right." "Well," the judge said when the tape ended, "that fundamentally changes the case." Well, Janie whispered. "Very interesting." "Mom, what do we do next?" Edward perked up. "We'll see, son, we'll see." "Your Honor," Edward's attorney intervened again. "We believe that the audio recording is not proof that the operation was done correctly." "That's a lie too," Lexi exclaimed. "It wasn't my fault, and I didn't wish Edward anything but good health." "Oh, come on," came a voice from the audience. The judge said grudgingly, "Please calm down. Keep order." There was an oppressive silence in the hall. Lexi could feel her face burning with shame and anger. It seemed that everyone around her, the judge, the lawyers, Edward, Janie, and Isabel, was enjoying her misery. Meanwhile, skillfully seizing the moment, the spouse's attorney began his opening statement, laying out his intention to disinherit Lexi from the inheritance left to her by Edward's late father, Edward Sir. "Your Honor, in addition to conducting the operation itself, Lexi was tasked with caring for my client's father during his illness. However, not only did she fail in her duty, but she was negligent and neglected her duties. Lexi was stunned. She had devoted the last 3 years of her life to caring for Edward Sir, who had been diagnosed with a rare and an extremely dangerous disease that required not only surgical intervention, but also competent drug therapy. So we are prepared to present evidence," the attorney continued with a smirk, "that will prove that Lexi repeatedly left Edward Sir unattended which led to frequent falls and micro-injuries. In addition, she has been extremely irresponsible with his finances, squandering significant funds on personal expenses. There was a pause for a moment. Then there was timid applause. It was Isabel and Janie anticipating triumph, expressing their admiration for Edward and the whole process. The judge frowned, then tapped his gavel. Lexi felt her heart clench with pain. The accusations were completely unfounded. After all, she very rarely left Edward Sir alone, and all of her financial transactions were thoroughly documented. After waiting for silence to return to the room, Lexi's attorney stood up and immediately issued a rebuttal, detailing her devotion to the late Edward Smith, who had once been a friend of her father's. All of these allegations are malicious lies concocted for the sole purpose of leaving my client without the inheritance that is rightfully hers under the will of the deceased, Bob summarized. Had he shocked the audience, but the last word had to be said by someone with special power and authority. In that case, in view of all the newly discovered circumstances of the case, the court adjourns for 2 weeks, the judge announced and tapped his gavel. Court is adjourned. Janie flashed a grudging smile and was the first to head for the exit. Edward and his new girlfriend followed, their faces clearly showing their disappointment at the postponement. Lexi and Bob were the only ones who felt they'd won a small victory in the form of a 2-week postponement. Don't feel bad, Helena. Everything will be fine. At least now we know what's on your husband's mind, the lawyer said outside. She nodded in agreement. As Lexi watched the trio of Edward, Isabel, and Janie drive away in a luxury car, she said, "Thank you, Bob. I should probably get going. Otherwise, I still have work to do." You know, Lexi snickered with a guilty face. "You're welcome. Call me anytime and get ready for a reconsideration." The lawyer said goodbye and, touching his client's shoulder in confidence, headed for his car. Lexi, on the other hand, wanted to walk to unwind a bit and try to recover before her shift. She lifted her head, gazing up into the frowning sky. It hadn't started raining yet, but the air was already filled with a premonition of it, just as her soul felt the inevitability of future disappointments. Lexi walked, immersed in her thoughts. Fragments of the past related to Edward Sturr swirled in her mind. A kind man with a gruff but surprisingly accommodating voice, who was always ready to help. Edward Sturr was a passionate man whose life was filled with ideas along with projects that he saw as his messages to the future. As an engineer by training, he dreamed of turning the city dump into a source of clean energy. Thus, in the unrealized plans of Edward Sturr was a modern waste recycling plant that could not only solve the problem of pollution, but also give a second life to some of the waste. No one believes in that, and Helena said he sighs and stares off into the distance. Everyone laughs, but I know his feelings. This is going to be a great thing. It's my legacy. Lexi smiled, remembering her father-in-law's burning eyes and his unquenchable passion for his work. He was a perfectionist, putting all his heart and energy into a project. Edward Sturr spent hours with his daughter-in-law, talking about new technologies and his own inventions that had not yet been patented. But most of all, he dreamed of the day when his mill would be the pride of the town. "I feel that Edward should carry on my business," said his father. "He is a smart boy and is sure to realize the importance of the business." But unfortunately, Edward never shared his father's enthusiasm. He was interested in other things: money, fame, pleasure. Edward Sir had hoped that his love for his son would ignite in him a spark of interest in his work. But he'd been wrong. Lexi remembered well how she had tried to explain to Edward the importance of his father's project, how she told her husband about the technology, about the opportunities that lay ahead of them. But Edward didn't want to listen. He was only interested in quick money and immediate success. "Honey, understand your daddy dreamed of keeping his business alive," Lexi said at her father-in-law's funeral. "He put so much work into it, and let's try to make his dream come true." But her husband only shook his head and smiled his cold smile. In his eyes, Lexi didn't see an ounce of respect for her father's memory. "You don't know anything about business. You're a doctor, and that says it all. You know how it is, to each his own. Yes, my father in the 90s made the initial capital, opened a business thanks to his inventions. But this is a different time. That's why it's all nonsense. It's a project no one needs. It's better to sell the land and invest the money in something more profitable. It's not for nothing that your father bequeathed this land and some of the equipment of his mini mill to you, he said. Lexi froze in place as if struck by lightning. Her heart clenched. Couldn't Edward realize even now how important this business was to his father? Couldn't he at least try to realize his dream? After all, now that Edward Sturr was gone, everything stopped. Innovative developments, patents promising cooperation with foreign investors, everything was abandoned. But Edward and Janie showed no interest in the business. Lexi entered the subway as if it were a refuge from the cruel world. The crowd of people rushing about their business seemed foreign and hostile to her. She pressed herself against the cold wall of the car, closed her eyes, and tried to pull herself away from the memories that came flooding back. Lexi remembered vividly the day Edward Sturr had been hospitalized in her ward. The diagnosis had been disappointing: a tumor in his abdomen, metastasized to his liver. He looked weak and thin, and there was anxiety in his eyes. "Don't worry, Edward," Lexi said with difficulty, trying to hide the worry in her voice. "We'll do our best." The doctors gathered in a concilium were discussing the risks and complexities of the surgery. "Yes, a severe case, Professor Aaron," the head of the department said glumly. "The tumor is located dangerously close to important vessels. The risk of bleeding is extremely high. Lexi, are you ready to take responsibility for this surgery?" "Ready," she replied firmly. "I've reviewed all the data, analyzed the possible risks, and we can handle it." Her confidence, brilliant knowledge, and experience then convinced everyone. There was a tense silence in the operating room. The assistants, the nurses, everyone was focused on their duties. Lexi stood at the operating table, her sterile gloved hands trembling slightly. The complicated surgery had lasted several hours, making her feel as if time had stopped. "Well, there, we won. It was a success," Lexi finally said, smiling tiredly after putting in the last stitches. "The patient is in stable condition." The next day, Edward Sturr's condition stabilized. He was slowly on the mend. Lexi visited him often, inquiring about his well-being, telling him the latest news. In turn, Edward Sturr never stopped thanking her for saving him. "Helena, you gave me a chance. I believed in you from the beginning," Edward Sturr began then. His voice was quieter than usual. "But what are you?" "I was only doing my job," Helena brushed it off. "I wanted to talk to you about something important." Lexi froze, looking closely at Edward's father-in-law. "He's not my birth son." Those words sounded like thunder. Lexi felt the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean?" she whispered, not believing what she was hearing. Edward Sturr sighed sadly and, pulling himself together, continued. "He was found as an infant in a wooded area, wrapped in an old blanket. No papers, nothing. My wife and I, anyway. The pregnancy was terminated again, you know. We just couldn't leave him alone, so we decided to adopt." Lexi was silent, trying to comprehend what she was hearing. The world around her seemed to dissolve, leaving only those words, like icy shards piercing her soul. "And why are you only telling me this now?" she asked. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "I wanted Edward to find out for himself when he was ready," Edward Sturr replied. "But I couldn't stand it. I needed you to know. You're part of our family, Lexi, and as such, you have a right to know the truth." "Does Edward know?" Lexi asked. "No, I was afraid it would hurt him and that he wouldn't understand. I didn't want my son to feel unwanted, abandoned. I love him like family, after all." "I always will," Edward Sturr replied. Lexi felt like her world was falling apart. "It's his story," she said a little audibly. "Does he need to know the truth?" "I understand. But please, let's wait. We'll talk to him when he's ready." Lexi nodded, unable to utter a word. That day in the operating room, where she'd performed complex statutory surgeries, her fingers performed the familiar motions on automatic, and she felt her eyes burning, but she kept her emotions under control. "Helena, did you give me a chance? I believed in you from the beginning," Edward Sturr began then. His voice was quieter than usual. "But what are you?" "I was only doing my job," Helena brushed it off. I wanted to talk to you about something important." Lexi froze, looking closely at Edward's father-in-law. "He's not my birth son." Those words sounded like thunder. Lexi felt the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean?" she whispered, not believing what she was hearing. Edward sighed sadly, and pulling himself together, continued. "And he was found as an infant in a wooded area, wrapped in an old blanket. No papers, nothing. My wife and I. Anyway, the pregnancy was terminated again, you know. We just couldn't leave him alone, so we decided to adopt." Lexi was silent, trying to comprehend what she was hearing. The world around her seemed to dissolve, leaving only those words like icy shards piercing her soul. "And why are you only telling me this now?" she asked. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "I wanted Edward to find out for himself when he was ready," Edward, sir, replied. "But I couldn't stand it. I needed you to know. You're part of our family, Lexi, and as such you have a right to know the truth." "Does Edward know?" Lexi asked. "No, I was afraid it would hurt him and that he wouldn't understand. I didn't want my son to feel unwanted, abandoned. I love him like family after all. I always will," Edward, sir, replied. Lexi felt like her world was falling apart. "It's his story," she said a little audibly. "Does he need to know the truth?" "I understand. But please, let's wait. We'll talk to him when he's ready." Lexi nodded, unable to utter a word. That day in the operating room, where she performed complex statutory surgeries, her fingers performed the familiar motions on automatic, and she felt her eyes burning, but she kept her emotions under control. "I found him unconscious on the penultimate step," Edward said. Lexi hurried to the exit, not yet knowing that this call would change her life forever. She arrived at Edward Surdot's house and found him in the state of a severe coma. The patient had been unconscious for some time, the ER doctor said. There is a suggestion that he had a stroke. Sadly, Edward Sturr never woke up, and a few days later he was gone. "He died of cardiac arrest," said the doctor who came to examine the patient, but his health condition after the operation was quite stable. However, it cannot be ruled out that the stroke was related to the consequences of the surgery. Lexi felt depressed. She realized that she had done everything she could to save her father-in-law's life, yet she had failed to keep him safe after the surgery. "It was just an accident," she mentally repeated. "Edward Sturr fell down the stairs. It wasn't my fault." However, Edward and Janie didn't believe in accidents and immediately found a reason to blame. "You're a murderer," Edward said. "You wanted the inheritance and willfully performed a bad surgery on my father." Those words hurt Lexi to the core. She couldn't believe that people who seemed close to her were capable of such baseness. Lexi stared out the window of the subway car. Images of the past flashed before her eyes. Edward Surdot's face, his grateful eyes, the tense faces of his co-workers in the operating room, and finally, a face contorted with anger. She got off at Medgorodok station, struggling to hold back tears. She needed to go to work, to her patients, to her life, which was now turned upside down. In the hallway of the clinic, Lexi met Helena. The older nurse had always been kind, caring, and in some ways had become Lexi's true friend at work. "Ah, Lexi, what's wrong with you? Pale as a sheet," Helena asked anxiously. "It's okay," Lexi tried to smile. But it didn't work, just didn't get enough sleep. The nurse took her hand. "I can see something's wrong. Tell me. Don't keep a load on your mind," Helena said. So Lexi took a deep breath and laid it all out as it was. About the trial, about her husband's betrayal, about Janie and the charges against her. "It's just awful," Helena said, "but don't despair, we'll help. Remember, you're not alone." Already in her office, Lexi took a deep breath and tried to pull herself together. She needed to finally get her mind off her problems and get to work. "Next patient," the nurse told Lexi. "Aaron." A middle-aged man with a concerned look on his face walked into the office. "Hello," he said. "I'm here for a consultation. I've been having intermittent abdominal pain." "Yes, please elaborate," Lexi said, trying to focus. At that moment, a man burst into the emergency room holding a child who, from the looks of it, was unconscious. The boy's face was pale, His lips were blue and blood was oozing from a wound on his thigh, soaking the fabric of his t-shirt and his father's hands. "Doctor, someone please help," shouted the man, breaking through the crowd that had instantly gathered around him. "My son fell off his bike." Lexi quickly left the office, realizing the matter was serious. "Calm down. What's your name?" she asked, examining the boy. "How did he fall? Where? What hurts?" "I don't know," the man whispered. "My name is Eden." Amin's son was just going down a slide, didn't control it, and hit himself. Lexi nodded and gave a curt command to the nurses, "Quick, gurney, and please have a bleeding stop kit ready." Soon the boy was placed and Lexi, holding his head, continued her examination. "Amin," she began, as if imprinting the name into her memory. "Can you hear me, Amin? Open your eyes." He didn't respond. "Breathing shallow and intermittent, pulse weak," said the nurse, who had already prepared an instrument to take his blood pressure. Lexi continued to quickly examine the wound. "Get an electrocardiogram, okay?" The nurse had already started hooking up the equipment. "Eden," Lexi turned to her father, "can you tell me if Amin is allergic to any medications?" "No, to nothing." The man answered with confidence. "Good." Lexi quickly assessed the depth of the wound. Thankfully, no vital vessels were affected, basically a scratch. "And actually, it's not as bad as it looks. Don't worry, we'll do what we can." "And what will you do?" Eden asked. "We're going to do a little surgery," said Lexi. "I'm sorry, but there's no way without it." "And surgery now? What if Amin gets worse?" Eden exclaimed and clung to her arm. But Lexi smiled and assured the young father that the injury was not life-threatening, and the surgery would be reduced to the application of a special patch. "Pulses improved," reported the nurse monitoring the boy's condition. "Good," Lexi said, "keep monitoring. Everything's going to be fine." The boy was just scared. That happens sometimes. He's a kid, after all. A lot of people get into trouble at that age. "Thank you," Eden whispered after the procedure was over. "Thank you for everything." Lexi was visibly embarrassed, and it also made her feel good to know that she'd been able to help, having once chosen the right profession, one that saved both health and lives. It was the most valuable thing she had right now. She smiled softly. "It's my job. There's no need for thanks. What's important is that Amin is healthy." But Eden, under the strong impression of his experience, was in no hurry to leave. He felt he needed to talk, to share with someone the weight of the past few years. And Lexi, against her will, had instilled confidence in him. "I'm sorry," he said in a broken voice. "I just don't know how to express my gratitude to you." Lexi nodded, inviting him to share his story. She sat down in a chair against the wall and gestured for Eden to sit across from her. "Have a seat, I'm listening to you." Eden sat down in the chair and suddenly felt fatigue come over him. He felt several years of tension spilling out like a burst dam. Silence fell, broken only by the quiet noise of cars outside the window. Lexi remained silent, giving him time to gather his thoughts. "I don't know where to start," Eden whispered in a quiet, slightly hoarse voice. "We'll start with what's most important to you." Lexi suggested softly. Eden slowly raised his eyes, and Lexi saw the bottomless depth of sadness in them. "My wife Isabel left when Amin was very young. The fontanel hadn't closed yet, and I was left alone. It was difficult from the beginning. I didn't know how to swaddle, how to soothe, how to understand his crying. I was working weekends, grabbed every opportunity I could just to feed my son." "But you did manage, I see?" Lexi asked. "Cope somehow. But it was years of loneliness, sleepless nights, constant fatigue. I wanted Amin to feel loved, protected. I dreamed of him having everything I didn't have as a child. I tried to be both father and mother to him. I cooked, washed, cleaned, played, read stories, all by myself." At that moment, Eden's voice shook, and he clenched his fists, as if trying to hold back a surge of emotion. "There were times I snapped. Sometimes I was as afraid I wouldn't make it. But I had no right to give up. Amin is all I have. He's my life, my hope, my meaning." Lexi listened without interrupting. She was well aware of how hard her father's journey had been. "And how is Amin? Does he remember Mom?" Lexi asked after a long pause. "I guess he remembers." Eden smiled sadly. He was just a baby when Isabel was still visiting us. But sometimes in moments like today, I see in his eyes as if he too is afraid of something he doesn't understand, as if he senses I'm not like other fathers. He feels your love, Lexi said confidently, and that's the most important thing. He also sees how hard you work for him. You're a real hero to your son, no doubt about it. Eden looked at the doctor for a long moment, as if trying to find confirmation of his own doubts in her words. I thought I was supposed to be different from my son. I saw other fathers playing with their kids, spending time with their families. And with us, it's different. It's just me and Ammon. Well, there's no such thing as perfect parents, Lexi pointed out calmly. Everyone makes mistakes. In that moment, she saw the words of encouragement slowly creep into Eden's heart, and his tense shoulders relaxed a little. What if her father faltered? What if he starts asking questions about his mother, about why she left? And I don't know what to tell him. And I don't want to hurt him with what I say. Well, in my opinion, you can answer all the questions honestly, Lexi said, walking over to the window. Tell him how much you love him, how much you cared for him. Explain that sometimes people make mistakes and things don't work out the way we plan. But the most important thing is that he can always count on your love and support. To be honest with your son and he will understand. Eden nodded slowly. His eyes glistened with tears. Thank you. You are the only person who has listened to my story without judgment. But I have faith in you and in Amin, she smiled. You are a real family and you will definitely be happy. The sweet smile played on Eden's lips. His mood had improved considerably, and the incident with her son's fall no longer seemed like a big deal. Eden left, thanking the clinic staff for their help. The end of the shift was quietly approaching, and soon Lexi was on her way out after changing her clothes. She'd been living in the suburbs in a rented apartment, where cats were noisy at night, and the neighbors were always having parties with breaking dishes and fights. But today everything was different. It was as if life's problems had come together and decided to give Lexi a little break. Tonight passed almost unnoticed. True, only in the morning she had a dream about her late grandmother Zena, who for some reason stood at the edge of the city dump and looked somewhere in the distance with a blank stare up at the mountains of garbage. Why was she having this dream? Lexi didn't understand, and what was the point of puzzling over it if every dreamer interprets what she saw in a different way? The morning in the surgical ward started as usual, with that pleasant aroma of coffee at the duty nurse's station and the more pungent smell of chlorine. A little later, the corridors were filled with the quiet footsteps of nurses and the muffled conversation of doctors. But in the room where little Ammon lay, there was a special atmosphere, warm, bright, full of childlike spontaneity and hope. Lexi, rested after a busy shift, came to visit her little patient. She entered the room with a smile and froze a few meters away from the bed. Amin watched her with obvious interest in his eyes. "Hello," she said in a cheerful voice. "Good morning," whispered Amin, blushing slightly. "How are you feeling?" Lexi asked, coming closer. Lexi sat down on a chair and started talking to the little patient, asking simple but interesting questions. "Do you like cars?" she asked, noticing the toy model truck Amin kept in his pants pocket. He nodded, embarrassed. "What other cars do you like?" Lexi continued. "Big and red," exclaimed the boy, and his eyes sparkled with joy. "That's great. You know, I like red cars too," said the doctor, smiling, "and I can also draw. Would you like me to draw you a red car?" Ammon's eyes widened with delight. "Sure. Lexi picked up the notebook and pencils that were in the nightstand and started drawing. She drew a bright red car speeding down a road surrounded by green trees. "Here," she said, holding out the notebook. The boy looked at the drawing with delight. "Wow, it's beautiful," he exhaled. "Do you want me to tell you the story of this car?" Lexi offered. "Yes, I do." And this car lived in a magical forest. It had very powerful engines that made it fly and helped all the animals that lived in the forest. One day it met a little bunny who was lost. After such an intriguing introduction, Lexi began to tell the story, portraying the animals, using vivid imagery and intonation. Ammon listened with bated breath, his gaze following every movement of her lips, absorbing her every word. And then the car helped the little bunny to find his mom, and everyone was very happy. And then they had a feast. Amin, fascinated by the story, smiled dreamily. "Can there be more?" he asked. "Okay," Lexi smiled. Then Lexi took out a brightly colored book with pictures of animals from the nightstand. "Let's read," she suggested, opening the book. Lexi read slowly, expressively, picking up the intonation for each character. Amin listened to her with great interest, looking at the colorful pictures. "Look, an elephant," said Lexi, pointing her finger at a picture with huge ears and a trunk. "Trunk," Amin repeated, looking at the picture. "And this is a giraffe. He has a very long neck so that he can get the tastiest leaves from the tallest trees." Amin listened as if mesmerized. He was literally mesmerized by her voice and her ability to immerse him in the wonderful world of history and animals. "And this is a lion," Lexi said, pointing to the fearsome predator, the king of the beasts. Amin laughed and mimed a growl. Lexi laughed along with him. She was incredibly pleased to see Amin perk up and his eyes fill with joy. She realized that she had found an approach to this vulnerable little boy, who had been deprived of the warmth of a mother's arms practically since birth. "You know, Amin," she said, "you are a very good boy. You have a good heart. Soon you'll get well and you'll be able to run and play again." "Won't you?" he asked, and his eyes filled with hope. "Well, yes," Lexi confirmed. "I'll come over every day and we'll draw, read, and tell stories." "Thank you." "You're welcome. I'm glad I can help you," Lexi said. She sat with him some more, telling stories, showing pictures. The little patient was completely enchanted by her attention and care. "Aunt Lexi," Amin asked suddenly, "will you be my mom?" She was a little confused. "Probably not, buddy. I can't be your mom, but I'll take care of you while you're in the hospital. I'll be your good fairy who helps everyone who needs it." "So a good fairy," Amin repeated, and his eyes sparkled. "Of course you are," Lexi said, smiling. "Stella's known to always take care of children and help them." "Good. Be my fairy then," Amin agreed. Lexi, after staying in the room for a while longer, went out and was met by a nurse in the hallway. "He's so excited," Megan said with a slight smile. "He's such a sweet boy. I think we'll make friends with him," the doctor replied. Lexi, as she headed to the restroom, felt like the day was just beginning. She realized that Amin was a special child who needed care and attention. Lexi visited him every day. The baby was eagerly waiting for the good fairy from the clinic to come and tell her about his dreams and plans for the future. "I want to grow up and drive a big red truck. I'm going to drive sand to the construction site to build beautiful houses," he shared. Lexi listened attentively and supported him. She drew houses and trucks with him. Of course, she understood that she could not replace her mom, but at the same time she became a real friend for him, a person who would always support and help. Lexi watched Amin become more confident, a spark of joy in his eyes again. One day, as she was reading him another story, Eden walked into the room. "Good afternoon, Helena," he said, smiling. "Thank you again for saving my son Damien. He's doing wonderfully well at your place. I'm glad he's feeling better." Eden stood for a moment in the room, then somehow hesitantly turned to her in a low voice. "Lexi, I'd like to take you to dinner. A small cafe in the center of town. This is my way of thanking you for taking care of my son." Lexi was a little confused. "Thank you for the invitation. It's my pleasure," she replied and smiled. "Great. Wednesday at 7 p.m. Would that work for you?" Eden asked. "Wednesday at 7 p.m. will be fine," Lexi confirmed. Eden said goodbye to Lexi and Amin and left the room. The doctor looked at the boy. He was smiling with a sly squint of his eye. "I'm going out to dinner with your dad," Lexi said. "That's great," Amin replied. On Wednesday night, as agreed, Lexi arrived at the cafe. Even though Eden looked a little worried, his eyes shone with joy. "Hello," he said, getting up from the table. "Thank you for coming." "Hello," Lexi replied, smiling. The young men settled in and almost immediately switched to you in conversation. Eden ordered dinner and they began to talk casually about everything. They talked about many things, work, life, Amina, her surprise. Lexi learned a lot about Eden, especially when she realized that he wasn't what he seemed at first. He was a kind, sensitive man who loves his son very much. Working as a mechanic at a machine shop, he was adept at almost any kind of machinery and could fix anything from wristwatches to complex mechanisms of software equipment and machine tools. "Lexi, thank you for everything," Eden said when dinner was over, and Min is feeling much better. "Oh, come on," Lexi said. "I'm glad I could help. Believe me, any other doctor in my position would have done the same thing without hesitation." "I hope we'll meet again," Eden asked hopefully. "Sure," Lexi replied. Eden paid for dinner and walked Lexi home. The walk in the evening as a whole had been wonderful. In Lexi's opinion, it had been a long time since she'd had such a good time. Even during her romantic relationship with her ex-husband, she couldn't remember such emotions, and that was because Edward had been stingy with gifts or flowers, as well as with displays of affection. Eden, on the other hand, was different. He could recite poems by famous poets out loud, making his heart swoon with happiness and delight. And then Lexi told him about her inheritance. "The recycling plant?" Eden asked cautiously. She nodded in agreement. "Can I see the unfinished marvel, I hope?" he asked. "Of course you can, but be warned, it's the city dump. It smells," Lexi warned him. Sensing that Ammon's father was serious, Eden decided to go all the way. On his day off, he went to the realm of household waste and garbage. The sun was already slipping towards sunset when Eden and Lexi found themselves there, coloring the sky in. Begraming in purple tones. It cast long shadows from the trash that towered over the dump, like unfriendly, jagged mountains. Lexi walked ahead of Eden, whose work boots sank into the dust and fine debris with a thud. She stopped, pointing to an unfinished metal structure that looked more like the skeleton of a giant animal than an industrial facility. "That's the mill, Eden." Eden, accustomed to the orderly world of the factory, where machines stood in rows and parts were arranged in their places, was startled. There was chaos everywhere. The acrid smell of rot mixed with the scent of gasoline and something sweetly spicy. The steel structures were rusting, damaged by time and weather. Vincent's dream was to make something useful out of it. Lexi continued, seeing that Eden was literally mesmerized by the sight, to recycle the trash to get energy. But alas, he didn't have time. "Impressive," Eden muttered, trying to ignore the smell. "I didn't think it was possible." "What's the big deal?" Lexi grinned. "It's the whole town's problem. All this garbage. It's not just lying around. It's poisoning the land, the air, the water." "Yes, I've noticed how dirty our river has become." Eden nodded. "We used to swim and fish there when we were kids. Now you can't even go near it." Lexi stepped forward, stepping around a pile of old refrigerators. It was to solve these problems that the project had been conceived. It was also supposed to give jobs to the homeless people who were surviving here. "But can't we just drive all this stuff away?" Eden said, and looked around, trying to understand the scale of the problem. "Where to another area? What about there? Our landfill is just a drop in the ocean, and there's more and more garbage every day. So we need to recycle," Eden said, looking at the mountains of garbage and the dilapidated factory. "It's not a bad idea. Could it work?" "Yeah, I'm sure it would." Lexi smiled. Vincent had put a lot of work into this project. He had the blueprints and schematics. He even assembled some prototypes of special machines. Immediately, Eden perked up. "And where are they?" "In the hangar." Lexi pointed to a small structure that had miraculously escaped destruction. Almost all the documentation is stored there. "So let's go there," Eden exclaimed, and hurried after Lexi. The hangar turned out to be a huge space, filled with all kinds of mechanisms and devices. Dust covered everything in a thick layer. But even through the dust, they could see the unusual structures made from improvised materials. He was a real craftsman. Lexi lovingly ran her hand over the rusty surface of the homemade press. Even from old parts, he could create something new. He was a businessman, though, and he wasn't poor. Eden walked between the various devices like a mesmerized man, scrutinizing them. A light of enthusiasm lit up in his eyes. Accustomed to working with machines, he saw in these artisanal products a hidden potential, an unusual approach to problem solving. What about the documentation? Can we understand how it all works? Eden asked hopefully. The documentation is in the container. Lexi pointed to a metal structure. I hope it's still intact. And the young men then rummaged through the container, finding yellow blueprints, handwritten notes, diagrams, and calculations. Interesting, Eden whispered. Leafing through a thick notebook filled with Vincent's handwriting, he was researching different types of garbage and developing recycling techniques. Yes, he dreamed of making our city cleaner. We can do it, Eden said suddenly. Not taking his eyes off the notebook, we can get this plant up and running. Are you serious? Lexi was surprised. Eden smiled and nodded in agreement, saying it was time to head back. Subsequently, he started with the simplest of things. The first thing he did was check the electrical wiring, replacing some parts with more modern ones. Cleaned and repaired broken mechanisms. Lexi, in turn, helped him by studying the records and blueprints. I think we can start with plastic recycling, Eden said, showing her a schematic of one of the devices. This press can shred plastic, and then it can be processed into pellets. What about the rest of the trash? Lexi couldn't help herself. Well, not all at once. You have to eat the elephant in pieces, Eden smiled. First plastic, and then we'll work on other types of waste. Days went by, and Eden spent all his free time at the landfill. At first he was just a mechanic, but he quickly learned and developed into a real engineer. I think we're going to need a helper soon, and maybe more than one, Eden said, sitting in the hangar behind the blueprints. The press is too complex for you and me to handle alone. You mean someone from the factory? Lexi asked. Maybe put out a call to students. Surely there are enthusiasts who are interested in the subject. We could try. Lexi supported his idea. And they did. They placed an ad in the newspaper at the factory and in the hallway of the local university. But soon they found a few kids who wanted to join their project. Day after day, week after week, they turned the old dump into a place of new possibilities. They were making a new future out of dirty and polluted piles of trash. In doing so, Lexi continued to save people in the surgery department as before. And Eden, a factory mechanic, turned into an engineer who gave a second life to garbage. Edward, though he was no longer alive by this time, still continued to inspire his followers. Naturally, Edward and Janie, Dad and Mom, didn't know all of this and had little preparation for the retrial. But Lexi's lawyer, Bob, wasted no time and did a huge amount of work. As it turned out, on the day of the alleged accident, Edward fell down the stairs not by accident at all. It was preceded by a violent quarrel with his adopted son. The lawyer was told all this by the former maid of the Smith family, who heard everything, but had to quit after the accident. In fact, Edward knew he was adopted and even found his real parents, who were drunk and living in a junkyard, and living on odd jobs. In a fit of rage and resentment toward his estranged father, Edward misjudged his strength and accidentally pushed Edward Sir down the stairs. Although the push came out relatively weak, Edward Sir was debilitated by the illness. That was enough. After realizing what had happened, Edward, with Janie's help, immediately came up with a fairy tale version of an accidental fall, deciding to indirectly blame Lexi for it. But he didn't think that Bob, who was a bit of a nuisance, would be able to get to the truth. So the retrial was fatal for Edward, and he found himself in the dock instead of the plaintiff. Isabel was blown away. Janie swore she knew nothing about the scam, but for Lexi, her ex-mother-in-law's words didn't matter. After all, together with Eden, they had fulfilled Edward Sturdot's dream, and the recycling plant was slowly gaining momentum. A man recovered. The only thing that reminded him of the incident was a small scar on his leg which, in his father's opinion, had clearly added gray hairs. But the most important thing wasn't even that. It was the fact that, having defended her inheritance, Lexi was able to start a new life with Eden and her mother. They had a beautiful, modest wedding, and they were just happy. Jennifer grew up in a poor village, so it's not surprising that she always dreamed of living in the city. This dream was encouraged by her mother. Go, Jessica. At least you'll live like a human being. At least they'll make you wash pots there. It's better in winter than to be lost here. The young people are all running away, and you're as good as anyone else. Jennifer hoped that a better fate awaited her in the city. She dreamed of becoming a nurse. Of course, she dreamed of becoming a doctor, but she realized that it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to learn. She didn't dream of going to college. She thought she could do it at school. But when she came to the city, she realized that she couldn't do it either. Yes, she finished school quite well, but it was a rural school. The level of education there left much to be desired. Her B's and A's didn't mean much if in many subjects they were taught by an elderly teacher who gave marks just out of kindness, not knowing all the subtleties. After evaluating her options, Jennifer thought she could prepare for and enter college, but it didn't work out. After 10 years in the city, she realized that her mother was right. She had to work as an orderly in a hospital, washing pots there. Jennifer did not escape the sad fate of many provincials. She had a son, Jason, without marriage. His father she met by chance. Youth was taking its toll, and Jennifer realized, with a companion to get through easier. Naively, she hoped that there would be a husband, a support. But her lover disappeared when Jennifer was pregnant. There were rumors he died, but she didn't know for sure. What did it matter if they weren't married? There was no alimony or pension. She had to make do with allowances and a nurse's salary. After years of wandering through hostels and barracks, she was lucky enough to get a room with the elderly Elizabeth, who treated her well. Although Elizabeth was often sick, Jennifer helped her around the house. In return, the landlady looked after Jason while Jennifer was at work and kept up with the rent. Jennifer resigned herself to living in poverty and loneliness, but it was still better than her home village. She'd only been back there once, for her mother's funeral, after which she'd sold the house for next to nothing for firewood. Okay, we didn't live rich. There's nothing to get used to, Jennifer sighed as she received her paycheck. She felt sorry for her son. Why should he live in poverty? At school, he was often made fun of because he didn't have not only excesses, but even the things he needed for school. It wasn't just his classmates who made fun of Jason. Even the teacher didn't feel sorry for the child, reprimanding him and reprimanding Jennifer. When they announced another fundraiser at the assembly, she was always short. She promised to bring it back later. But where was she going to get some? I completely understand, Jennifer, but this is not my whim. It's a school-wide requirement. So try to give as soon as possible, the teacher said, pressing her thin lips together. Other moms also looked at her judgmentally. Everyone understood, but that didn't make it any easier. It wasn't easy for a single mom. In such situations, she imagined what it was like for her son. But what could she do? Jennifer worked a part-time job, taking extra shifts, taking care of the sick beyond what she was supposed to for a small fee, but it was too little. Jason understood. The smart, good boy was doing well in school and didn't give his mother any trouble. He didn't reproach her for always being short and didn't demand too much. He didn't even complain about being bullied at school, but he was so abused that he sometimes ran away. And how could you blame him if he always lacked something? I didn't want to go home, but I couldn't upset Elizabeth. Let her think he just didn't want to learn. She'd still be unhappy that he'd run away, because she'd always told him to obey his teachers, to respect them, and to live by the rules. Otherwise, it could be like her son Andrew. Elizabeth had a son, but unfortunately he was in prison. She was sure that Andrew was not guilty of anything. He had just been framed. I mean, he never took anyone else's money. She often complained to Jennifer. He was always nice, respectful, but there are a lot of bad people. He worked on the farm. Everyone was happy with him, and then he was set up. He was accused of embezzling a large sum of money. Where's that money? You saw we were living paycheck to paycheck. I didn't have money for a good lawyer. It was clear to everyone that he was framed, but how to prove it? I'm afraid to even think about what would happen to him in prison. What if he dies? Jennifer tried to reassure her. Don't say that. When your son comes back, you'll be in better health. But Elizabeth, with her small pension, couldn't borrow either. She rented out her room to collect money to send to her son in prison, or to send him money, because it's even harder there than it is here, she said. How does a mother not ache for her only son? Jennifer understood that very well, and little Jason also tried not to upset Grandma Elizabeth. Once again, having run away from school, he went not home, but to his mother's work. But he didn't say why he left early. He said the last gym class was canceled. But Jennifer realized what was wrong. Jason didn't have the right uniform for gym class. His sneakers were torn, and he couldn't buy new ones yet. So Jennifer didn't scold him. She patted him on the head and decided it wouldn't be a big deal if he sat in the back room until her shift was over. Gregory Lyon, the head of the department, upon seeing the boy, expressed his displeasure. But what is this called? Outsiders walking around the ward. This is a hospital after all, not something out there. Fine, if you're in a desperate situation, let him escort her out, but not walking all over the ward. But sitting in the back quietly and not bothering anyone, Jennifer assured him that his son wasn't going anywhere. He's quiet, calm, but how do you make a boy sit in one place? Especially in a new place where everything is interesting. Meanwhile, in the department we have not only rooms for all patients, but also a few paid separate rooms, where people who can pay for treatment lie. They're the ones I'm mostly worried about. That's it. Gregory Lyon, the rich have their quirks. They may not like to see a boy walking around the hospital who has nothing to do with the sick or the doctors. And anyway, the child doesn't belong here. Jennifer sternly ordered Jason to sit in the back room. You have your notebooks with you. Why don't you sit and do your homework or read something? Otherwise we'll both get kicked out. The boy obeyed his instructions faithfully. But then he went out of the back room to visit the toilet. In the corridor he caught such a scene from one of the patients from the very ward to which he could not even come close. That is, from the paid ward. A very beautiful and dressy woman came out. The boy even froze with amazement. It seemed to him that it was some kind of artist. Behind her a man was sticking to the wall. There is no time. Maxim, you'll have to forgive me, she said hurriedly. She kissed the patient, told him to get well, and hurriedly walked toward the exit. The man looked at her, embarrassed, then shifted his gaze to Jason. What are you doing here, kid? Is someone sick? No, my mom works here, the boy replied. I came to see her. Could you help me to my bed, please? My legs don't walk at all. I'll just lean on you a little so I don't fall. Jason, of course, walked the man over, helped him to the bed, and stared at him again with his mouth hanging open. This time he was surprised by the collection of strange figures on the nightstand. They were animals, birds, little men. But the strangest thing was that they were all made of colored paper. Apparently it had been folded somehow, and such interesting things had come out. He'd never seen anything like it. Do you like my zoo? The man asked with a smile. Very much, replied the boy. How are the live ones? Do you make them yourself? Yes, and I learned myself once when I was a child, when I was like you. And ever since then I have been folding them, sometimes out of nothing to do. It's called origami. Would you like me to teach you? Can I do that? I really want to, but I don't think I can do it. Why not? I did it. Here, look how it's done. The man pulled another piece of orange paper from the stack and began folding it. Jason was moving so fast that he didn't have time to follow his hands. But soon enough, the simple piece of paper produced a sitting ginger cat. Here's your cat, he handed the figure to the boy. Wow, I didn't even notice how you did it. No, I can't do that. I was the one who held the weightless kitty in the palm of my hand for you. Come by sometime and I'll teach you how to do it too. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to get some sleep, said Max Irving. Thank you very much. I'd love to come in, but they won't let me. But I don't mind. Just tell them I invited you. My name is Max Irving, by the way. You can call me Uncle Max. Just say that if anyone asks if I said it was okay. I'm Jason Ann. My mom's Jennifer. She works here as a nurse. Why don't you tell them you said I could come in too? I'll get scolded and my mom might get fired, the boy worried. Don't worry. I'll tell them I'm inviting you. It's boring here alone. So Jason started coming over often. Max Irving, who really told everyone that he and the boy were friends, and he had nothing against it. The nurses didn't like this friendship very much. They knew that the patient lying in this ward was a very rich man, but apparently really lonely. Yes, he had a beautiful wife, but she came rarely and for a very short time, explaining her absence by her busyness. They said she was busy with the affairs of the company while her husband was ill. No wonder the sick man is bored alone. And the boy, who clearly lacks male companionship, since he never knew his father, reached out to him precisely because of these unconscious considerations. Max Irving, after all, enjoyed making his little friend. But here was when the boy would miss him. Besides, Jennifer knew from the talk of the doctors and nurses that this patient was about to undergo a difficult operation which he might well not survive. Well, why all this talk? Because of Jason, she thought, but she didn't mind. After all, let her son have some joy. Jason was really getting into origami, and he was even starting to make some of the figures, and additional lessons will not hurt him. After all, Jennifer had no money to send her son to any classes. School classes alone are not enough for general development, so it would not hurt. Then, however, it turned out that she was worried for a reason, although not quite what she should have been worried about. After all, in one of the paid wards there was trouble. One of the patients lost a cell phone of the latest model, very expensive. What's so surprising, said one of the nurses. There's a lot of people hanging around the ward. The hospital has become a thoroughfare. She was referring, of course, to Jason. She didn't like the boy coming to his mother. She thought it was an unacceptable indulgence on the part of management. The boy was immediately questioned. He swore, of course, that he hadn't gone into that patient's room and hadn't taken anything. But who would believe him? Fortunately, Max Irving himself stood up for him. He said that the boy had really only come to see me and had not been anywhere else all this time. And in general, I do not understand why you are attached to the child. I told you he'd be coming to my place. Well, he's coming over. Why does someone have a problem with something again? Like he's throwing his stuff around, or he's a thief, or he's cleaning it up. And it's the fault of the kid who wasn't around. Jason was dropped, and the phone was found somewhere. Jennifer wanted to already categorically forbid her son to come to the hospital, but the same thing. The sick man asked her not to. You'll have to excuse me, but your son and I have really become friends, and I do feel better when I talk to someone. I have to take my mind off my illness. And Jason, your smart guy, is really interesting with her. Jennifer knew that the patient's condition was worsening, mostly perhaps because he was afraid of the upcoming surgery, and his wife was coming in less and less often. And several times there were rumors that she was not coming alone, but some man in a car dropping her off. That is, the woman, most likely, is not very much waiting for the recovery of her spouse and agrees even to another option. And seeing that her son also misses his adult friend, she lets Jason drop by Uncle Max's house. You see, he's really going to have surgery. It's hard for him. He's in pain right now. You should cheer him up somehow, Jennifer asked. Yeah, I'm trying, Jason said. And I don't talk to him about anything sad, just the good stuff. Well, good for you, the mother said, and began to look into Max Irving's room more often too, seeing the genuine support of this family. The patient once addressed them with a rather strange request. You see, I have a serious operation to perform, and even the doctors do not hide the fact that I may not be able to bear it. And if that's the case, it wouldn't hurt to think about a will. I've decided to videotape it on my phone. Please record it and give it to the notary. I'll give you the address, Jennifer, of course. Agreed. So she and Jason recorded Max Irving's last will and testament on the phone he gave them. The boy got seriously excited. It's Mom, Uncle Max isn't going to die, is he? What do you think? Anxious, he asked. I don't know, honey. I don't know. Let's hope everything will be all right, replied Jennifer, who already knew that the chances of the sick man were slim, especially since he was already thinking about a will. Too bad for him, he was a young man. To live as she left hospital with the phone on which the sick man's will was written. She was met by Max Irving's wife, Diane. She already knew Jennifer was caring for her husband, so she turned to the nurse. How is he? She asked nonchalantly. Still alive. No surgery. Diana did not believe that her husband would recover. She had already talked to the doctor and learned that the chances were slim. And in fact, other than Jennifer and her son, few people believed in Max Irving's recovery. No, the surgery is scheduled for tomorrow. I think she told Diane we have good doctors. It should go fine. Besides, your husband is still a young man. He's really worried, though. You'll have to support him somehow. He even made a will on his cell phone. I'm going to the notary right now. I'll show him. Well, Diana perked up. Show me. She looked and found out that he bequeathed all the assets in the company to her. She almost danced with joy. It was just what she needed. She took the phone. So don't go to any notary, I'll go myself. It's our own business, she said. And don't say anything to Max, and I support him. And don't worry, everything will be fine. Jennifer gave the smartphone to Diana without a second thought and decided, since she didn't have to go to the notary, to go to church and pray for Max Irving, who was sick and was about to undergo a complicated surgery. Diana dropped in on her husband, chatted with him for 5 minutes and ran to the notary, but not to the one her husband had asked her to go to, but to another one who could dispose of this will in a much more favorable way. She was sure her husband's hours were already numbered, and now she would be a rich, cheerful widow, all the more so because she already had someone who was ready to replace her husband in every way. And that man was at least a reliable substitute for her husband. Ethan had been paying Diana's attention for a long time, but as long as her husband had been healthy, she'd been cautious. And now that he was about to die, what was there to lose? She didn't know how to live alone. She didn't want to do the business of the firm, although she had some education. So the new husband had to be both smart and reliable. That way, not much would change in her life. She will again become the wife of a solid man, a business owner, also in a way dependent on her. The young woman was confident in her lover's feelings and in the power of her charms. But now that she would be even richer, everything would work out just fine for her. It would be good if the notary could arrange it so that she could take her rights early, without having to wait for Max Irving's death. Of course, she'll have to share it with him, but that's all right. I've got more spending to do. What can I do? She's a woman. That's why she has a husband. One dies, another one comes along. What else can she do? I wonder how long I have to mourn, how long before I can get married. I don't really want to wait that long, she thought. She'd been living with Ethan without any marriage, but it's not right. When the notary heard about the fee, he was willing to help. But there was a hitch. Max Irving survived. Yes, he was still in a serious condition, and there was no guarantee that he would recover. But even the fact that he was alive was an unpleasant surprise to his wife, as well as Jessica's deputy on all fronts, and even the notary. But for Jennifer and Jason, on the contrary, they were very happy that the man they had already come to sympathize with would probably recover soon. Yes, it's still a long way off, but there is hope, and the prospects are much better than they were before. Another event took place in the life of mother and son. Elizabeth's son was released from the colony. When she learned that she would soon be able to see him at home, the old woman flew like on wings, forgetting about her illnesses and looking 10 years younger. She was happy. Jennifer, on the other hand, was not expecting anything good from this event. Of course, she tried to hide her feelings from her mistress, helped her with the cleaning of the apartment, with the purchase of food for the solemn meeting of a man she did not know at all. But Elizabeth noticed her mood. Why does Jennifer seem so downcast? What am I getting excited about? Everything has become, as they say, blue and green for me, she said. But I noticed that there's something wrong with you. No, not at all. Elizabeth, I'm very happy for you and your son. I was just thinking that Jason and I will have to look for another place to live. It's very difficult for me right now, Jennifer explained her condition. Yes, the Lord is with you. Why? The landlady marveled. I never thought of asking you to leave. I've grown accustomed to you as kin. Or are you afraid of the fact that my son is a prisoner after all? What did he pick up behind bars there? What bad habits? Don't even think about it. He's still the same as he was, she said. No, I didn't think that for a minute. You've told me about him. I believe your Andrew has remained an honest and decent man. It's just that we're occupying his room now. I mean, we'll have to vacate it. And anyway, he might not like having strangers and a baby living next door, Jennifer said. Well, I wrote to him about you, Jason, and he doesn't mind. We have 3 rooms. The little one next to the kitchen is good enough for me, so don't even think about moving. In the meantime, Elizabeth's son had returned, met the new tenants, and turned out to be a really nice man who had been little affected by several years in a penal colony among criminals, though thoughts of revenge against those who had put him behind bars did not leave him. Andrew met and quickly found a common language with Jason, took a keen interest in his affairs, and going into his room, was surprised by the figures made of paper. He admired the boy's skill and asked him who had taught him to make such things. And this is in the hospital where Mom works. There is a man lying there. Uncle Max, I go in to see him, and he teaches me. He's even better at it. He made this cat. And these parrots Andrew was wary. He knew Max, the origami enthusiast. He'd worked on Max Irving's farm. He thought he was the reason he was in prison. But he didn't think it was appropriate to talk to the kid about it. So, after a moment, he spoke to Jennifer. I'd like to visit your hospital. Set me up a meeting with this Max Irving. But don't worry, I'm not going to have any kind of showdown there. I just want to look him in the eye, he asked, telling me what business was making him want this meeting. Oh, Andrew, is that necessary? I realize you have a grudge against this man, but still, think for yourself. He's in a pretty serious condition right now, just out of surgery. I think you'd better wait until he's discharged. Who knows? How will this meeting end for him? Jennifer tried to talk him out of it. Well, yes, you're right. He'll go to a resort somewhere to improve his health, and when he comes back, you won't be able to get near him through security. I tell you, I'm not going to do anything bad to him. I'm not going to fight or even quarrel with the sick man. I'll just tell him I know all about his affairs and see how he reacts no matter how hard Alicia tried to prevent this meeting. Andrew insisted, and she realized that he would get to the ward anyway, and then the matter could end in a serious scandal. In the end, Jennifer agreed, said when and how it would be most convenient to see the patient, taking an oath that everything would be peaceful. And so it was. Andrew, unnoticed by anyone, entered the room, saw the man he considered his enemy, and was amazed. So bad was the man he remembered as blooming and full of vigor, but he was not going to express sympathy for him. Well, Max, do you remember me, or have you forgotten? I remember. So why did you work for us? Then something happened. What happened was you sent me to prison for 5 years. That's what happened. No way, by the way, and it seemed like the right thing to do. You got the money. I did all the time, like I had my best interests at heart. I don't know what you mean. I didn't even do it. I wasn't even in court. It was my deputy who exposed you. I testified afterward. Isn't that right? So I had nothing to do with it. Of course, now you can blame anyone. You're the boss. So everything comes from you. You knew it wasn't my fault. I didn't know that. The fact that you allegedly embezzled the money for that deal was reported by whom? Not me. I didn't testify. Ethan was in charge of the finances. I was in charge of the organization. And anyway, I don't know what you want now. You had to prove your innocence earlier in court, and now what difference does it make whether I believe you or not? I understand you've already served your time. What now? Andrew looked at his former boss. He had turned even paler, sweat beading on his forehead. Apparently, this conversation had exhausted the sick man, and it was not remorse but his own plight that tormented him. It was simply uncomfortable to talk to a man in such a state. Well, I guess he'll get his without me. He's breathing down his neck, thought the visitor, and left the room. He ran into a very beautiful woman, the wife of the chief. Yes, it was Diana. She had heard Andrew's conversation with Max Irving and realized that this man could help her in getting rid of her husband, who did not want to die. Oh, so you're the one who went to jail for bribery, then, she whispered. She caught Andrew by the sleeve. And you believe him? I know perfectly well that it was my husband who did everything to get you locked up. You, of course, as an honorable man, decided to forgive a sick man. He's not sick at all. He's faking it. He didn't just set you up. He's got 40 or 40 enemies, and he's lying to everyone like this. You shouldn't listen to his lies, but deal with him like a man. So what? Do I like it with him? When he's lying like that, replied the astonished Andrew. Strange things you say? Well, why fight? There are plenty of ways to punish a man somehow. Well, to punish him for his misdeeds, you know. He's lying there in the tubes, disconnect something and it's over. Or you could slip him something. Thanks. I've been in jail before. Let the 40-40s do that, and I'll do it, Andrew muttered, ripped her manicured fingers from his sleeve, and went on his way, marveling at the callousness of his former boss's wife. God must have punished him not only with illness, but also with such a wife. It's a lot to think about, he thought, and no one noticed Jason standing nearby, who had heard the whole conversation. That was how she'd helped raise Jason. She was always ready to offer advice, motherly pity. She was the one who had to be buried, not his own mother. Jennifer felt truly orphaned. She was now the primary adult in her life and Jason's. It wasn't the elderly Elizabeth who was pitied. It wasn't the son who wasn't happy all the way through. Due to the funeral, Jennifer didn't come to work for a few days, and when she returned, she learned a terrible thing. Max Irving overestimated his strength, decided to walk on his own. As a result, he fell, hit his head, and fell into a coma. This gave his wife new hope. She was sure that now her husband would definitely die. She was already tired of waiting for this sad event. As far as her lover was concerned, too, the doctors had explained to her that Max Irving had a chance, albeit tiny, of recovery, so there's no way to take him off life support right away. We have to wait. If he stays like this much longer, you know what I mean. Diana didn't want to lose face even in this situation. She tried to make it look good. But he's suffering. We don't know how he feels being in that state. Maybe it makes sense to let him go. Do we have the right to torture a man when he's completely helpless? She said, breaking her arms. I understand, and in some ways you may be right, but everyone has the right to live. I know, and I don't insist on anything. But keeping him alive must cost money, and I don't have any. He's been ill for so long. The firm's gone under. I have practically nothing to live on. For the time being, he'll be supported by the state. But of course, it can't go on indefinitely, the doctor said reassuringly. But Diana, in fact, already felt like a widow. Not now, so in a week her husband would finally die. So she could feel like a free woman. Now she had access to all her assets and could deny herself nothing, and she did. True, in her naivete and self-confidence, she'd let Ethan use everything. But for the time being, everything was as it should be. True, the lover sooner got tired of waiting. For a week, a month and a half had passed, and Max Irving lay there, neither conscious nor dying. You understand, something so it will start soon, and we will be left with nothing, the lover said unhappily. So what am I going to do? Not kill him? I don't want to sit in jail, Diana justified herself. And who pays for his stay in the hospital? Am I? Would you at least think about what it would mean for us? Ethan boiled. Am I crazy? Spend money on something like this? I don't know who's paying for it. The head doctor is not talking to me. He either suspects something or just angry that I persuaded to disconnect my husband. Humanists. Now they probably pay for everything out of humanity, and we have to suffer. How can we expect them to be humane? They cut the unhealthy ones without thinking twice. You're the one who's messing with my head. You're probably hoping that your beloved will wake up. You want to go back to him. You should have told me so. I don't mess with my head. I'm wasting my time with you. Are you scared, Dimochka? Diana, don't say that. You're the most precious thing to me. You can see it yourself. I only want to be with you. It was true. Despite all her dexterity and unscrupulousness, Diana realized that quickly find a new man who would be so well versed in business and agreed to take her as a wife will not be possible. And the search may not end at all as desired. There's the risk of being left alone with no money. But for some reason, she trusted Ethan. Turns out she shouldn't have. He'd had enough of his mistress, who'd been too self-important before. And now, having intercepted her husband's money, she got naked. As a result, one day Ethan simply disappeared with all the money that Diana already considered his. She was left with nothing. Her husband is not sure if he'll survive or not, and if he did, wouldn't she be held responsible for the missing money? And a lot of other things. The lover had disappeared in an unknown direction. Diana's only solace was alcohol. She didn't know who was making sure Max Irving stayed on life support and why. And that was Jennifer and Andrew. During that time, they managed to get married. Andrew got a job. But Jennifer couldn't forget about Max being in such dire straits. She realized that she had nothing to do with this man. Besides, she was a married woman now. Still, she couldn't leave Max without help. You don't think anything of the sort. But I can't leave him, Jennifer told her husband. And he, oddly enough, agreed with her. You know, I feel the same way. You can't do that. I mean, to let a person just die like that. Maybe I'm the reason it happened. But I didn't come until after his surgery. So I rushed to apologize to prove that I wasn't the reason he was in that position. So let's do what we can. There are enough people who want him dead without us. We'll do the opposite, save a life. See if it counts somewhere. And so, while they had the opportunity, they paid for Max's stay in the clinic. Then they started to get some quotas and attracted volunteers. Only thanks to this, Max Irving got the opportunity not only to live, but also to recover. As a result, he came out of his coma. A year of being between life and death was not in vain. He still had a long way to go to fully recover, but there were doctors who were also interested in the fact that such a heavy patient still stood on his feet. And Max himself was not going to remain an invalid. Besides, his memory was not lost. He remembered everything that preceded the illness. He also remembered the role his wife had played in what had happened. He decided beforehand that he wouldn't stay with her. Now that he knew what kind of person Diana was, he felt nothing but disgust for her. Diane, by all accounts, had already buried her husband. During his stay in a coma, She only visited the doctor to find out when Max would finally die, and now she was in no hurry to visit him. Did Max Irving have bad news for her? But Diana was in no hurry to come. For one thing, she still hoped that her husband was now almost an ex-husband, and even if he didn't die, he'd become severely disabled, which meant she'd get at least the firm, which wasn't bad either. She was not going to work, but she could sell it and live well on the proceeds. In any case, not worse than on the crumbs that could be obtained from the sale of the remnants of former luxury. She had already reached the point of selling things. The money from that was very little. She had friends and girlfriends who helped her to drink the proceeds. In addition, taking advantage of her condition, they did not hesitate to steal from her. At some point, Diana, having learned that her husband survived and even recovers, decided to visit him. Who but Max Irving could help her in her pitiful condition? She hoped very much that he would forgive her. After all, he had loved her so much. Besides, the young woman still counted on the fact that she had some influence over him. And did he remember much from the past? She thought hopefully. Then one day a nurse asked Max Irving, "Is your wife here to see you?" "They want to see her, so you can talk to her." Visits were generally forbidden. Only the staff were allowed in his room. "How did everyone know about your wife?" The relationship was ambiguous. "Well, where to go? We had to do it anyway." "Let her come in." Diana entered the room timidly, with an unhappy smile. Small steps approached, almost crept up to her husband's bed. Cautiously sat down on the edge of the chair and whispered, "Hello, Max, hello." "You sit down like that, tentatively, or something." Jumped up, a little squeamishly, her husband said. She giggled timidly. "I'm so glad you're joking. It means you're getting better. Why the tirade?" "You think I'm going to thank you for what I've done?" Max asked dryly. The wife became agitated. "What are you scolding me for?" Diana stammered. "Honey, well, won't you forgive me? I've been hurt, too, haven't I? That scoundrel Ethan, you were right to call him sneaky. He cheated me, too. And I was in such a terrible state, crying all the time, always alone. And you were on the verge of life and death. And then he first seemed to sympathize, and then promised that he would double, triple his fortune. Don't you give a shit? You're making my ears ring." Her husband cut her off irritably. "It's disgusting to listen to you, Diana." "Well, don't be like that." Max already tearfully, she dragged on. "You must understand and forgive me. Yes, I understand you perfectly well. Too bad it's too late to forgive something like that. However, we'll talk about that later when I'm discharged in front of my lawyer. For now, if you would be so kind as to go out." "I'm tired and feeling very ill," he replied. "Well, honey, I'm your wife. I'm supposed to be with you." "I'll help," Diana clamored. "What do you want me to do? Strangle the tubes shut off? Slip in some kind of nasty drug? Have I heard about your plans? Don't make me call security. You don't want to be let out under arms." He reached for some kind of button. "That's it. That's it. That's it. I'm leaving now." She tried to hug him, but ran into Max's gaze, recoiled understandingly, and hurriedly retreated to the door. When she left the room, it was as if she'd shed her humble mask, her face contorted with anger. "All right, Max, all right. We'll talk in front of the lawyer and the prosecutor. He's the one who was scaring me with the divorce. We'll see what happens. I'm going to have to go in there every day. I wonder if he'll really get discharged. That snake is tenacious. I'm going to have to start trusting him again. And the main thing is to deal with Ethan, the bastard. If not even to return the money, at least to release his guts." But alas, Diana had neither acquaintances to whom she could appeal with such a request, nor money to pay for the services of vigilantes. She sat down on a bench in the hospital park, took out a flask of cognac, sipped it. Her mood improved expectantly. She remembered something important, and that man was a criminal. He wanted to deal with Max. That man said he had nothing to do with it. He should be brought in after all. These prisoners are clever people. Let him find him and talk to him properly. But where could I find the bandit himself? During these thoughts, Jennifer managed to take a drink, which gave her courage and awakened some memories. She remembered that the person she was looking for had something to do with the local nurse, or nurse, as Jennifer called her again. She had gotten the address of this very employee from the Hardy Medics and had gone to see her, but it turned out to be quite simple. Jennifer wasn't home. The door was opened by the same ex-convict who lived with her, drunk as always. Jennifer was eloquent and persuasive. "So, he changed his mind about killing my boyfriend. That's good for you, of course. It wasn't Max Irving's fault. I looked into it. He's got some connections. And you've decided to forgive everyone else. Well, yours really isn't. Where's the guy who put me up to all this? I don't even know. If you did, you'd tell me. Andrew's a little wary. I don't want someone like you to find him. Tell me. You're afraid, just say so." The guests excitedly encouraged. "You must keep your tongue to find him. You need to know who, how, and where. And I don't know. But you're good. You need to point your finger at him, then you'll find him. That's the way I'd find him. But I'm a woman, you see. What can I do? I can only give you a little guidance. I mean, he's been ripping me off. I don't care about the money. We'd have to take care of him ourselves." So Diana tipped Andrew off, gave him Ethan's exact details, and told him to hurry. He's got a bag of money. He's not going to wait here to get his neck broken. and he'll leave. And then on some paradise island, and he'll sunbathe there, and laugh at us fools, Diana said. Andrew, to be honest, didn't care about revenge. Life had somehow started to get better. It was a pity to lose what had appeared in recent years. But on the other hand, how could he forgive all that this scoundrel had done to him? Especially after this beauty's words about cowardice, about how the scoundrel would be happy and well off. Andrew would never go to a place like this and take his family and kids out. No, not at all. He didn't like that. To find his enemy, he turned to a fellow inmate he'd served time with. I mean, the man who owed him a favor. Andrew had saved him from a very big trouble during his time in prison, and he had promised to help everyone in a difficult situation. He wasn't going to torture him much by reminding him of that debt. It was saved for some special occasion, and here it was. He didn't remember the name of this friend, and maybe he never knew it. Back in the zone, they called him the Bogeyman. Some very well-read fellow had made it up. He said that in some book there was such a character, a swindler and a swindler. But this one was the same. It wasn't hard to find him, although the rogue didn't sit around forever either, that he was quicker somewhere. But Andrew knew where to find him, so he found him and made his request. What is it? Andrew, can I find you, a man for you? You can have 7 of them. Where does he live in the city? Or somewhere else? The hustler was excited about the assignment. If I knew, I wouldn't need you. Jessica, I give you the basic notes, you find him for me, and we go our separate ways. You don't owe me anything. Teach me, it's urgent. If you don't find it within a week, you forget this conversation ever happened, and the debt will be forgotten. Yes, I'll find it, don't doubt it. I'll get it from under the ground, the buddy declared. Andrew began to wait. From Jennifer's house. They lived together. Andrew had promised her before the wedding not to get involved in any more stories. She had believed it, but now she was beginning to guess from her husband's condition that what she had so feared had happened. Andrew was up to no good. She tried to talk to him, to talk Andrew out of it. I don't know what you have in mind, but I don't want anything to happen to you. Let's just live quietly and peacefully already. I don't want to be alone again, It's really hard. But what to do? No way. I'm not leaving you, and I'm not starting anything. I made a promise, yeah. I'm a little nervous, but that's because they offered me a promotion at work, and I'm a little nervous about it. No, I'm not going to tell you anything yet. It's nothing. But when it becomes clear, I'll tell you right away. That's how he got rid of his wife's questions. He realized, of course, that he risked completing his revenge. Maybe it wouldn't be good for him. He felt sorry for Jennifer and Jason. He truly loved them, but he couldn't just give up his plan. Unless he could walk into the light and find Ethan, and even then, he wouldn't be satisfied. But his buddy didn't let him down. 3 days later, he called to say he'd found the right man. Now what do I do? Give him something, he asked. Absolutely not. In general, forget about me, about him. I'll take it from here, to be honest. Andrew didn't yet understand what he was going to do. Kill his enemy. It's not an easy thing to do, and punishable. And what good would it do to kill Ethan? Make him go to the police. Get him to confess. That way he clears his name and Ethan goes to jail, and it's not any easier. You try to put a guy like that away, he'll pay you off, that's all. Well then just meet him and tell him to pay in money, like compensation for the lost years, for his mother's health, for his own ruined life. Yeah, I guess that would be fair. And money with Jason wouldn't hurt. It was clear that this scoundrel wouldn't part with his savings so easily. I mean, you could threaten him with something. Ethan's a coward. Andrew already knew that, but he didn't know that he was so cowardly and lacking in dignity. Andrew drove up to Ethan's house, which of course was hiding from everyone, law enforcement, former creditors, Diane, and of course Andrew. He was waiting for the time to draw up the documents and easily go abroad with all the money he already considered his own. Suddenly, when everything was already in place, he cautiously walked out of the abandoned house outside the city and came face to face with Andrew. Well, weren't you expecting me? The ex-con said mockingly. Well, I've come for compensation, so to speak. I'll have to share. Oh, how Ethan was frightened. How he began to ingratiate himself with promises. And he slowly crept closer and closer to his car. Or rather, not his car, but to the old Ziguli. Apparently bought for nothing for conspiracy purposes. But Andrew saw all these maneuvers and did not believe a single word. Nice, but that's not why I'm here, But you understand me too. Not in my pocket. I carry money. Ethan clasped his hands to his chest. Now I'll go to cash it. We'll go together. Andrew took him firmly by the elbow. But Andrew, you should not be there. You could ruin everything, but don't you realize I'm in a semi-legal position now? If he sees I'm not alone, we'll both be left with nothing. I'm almost out of nothing now. You don't think I'm getting left behind, do you? So he moved closer and closer to the car, hoping to elude his pursuers. But Andrew managed to jump into the backseat. Ethan broke free, but there was nowhere to go. He had to go, but where and why share? He wasn't going to share a dime with anyone. He hoped to get away from Andrew somehow. He kept talking about some difficulties that wouldn't allow him to get the money right away. Andrew, already annoyed by the lies, couldn't take it anymore and grabbed Ethan by the back of the body to scare him. "I'll beat you with my own hands right now," he yelled, overly frightening his enemy. Ethan threw the steering wheel, trying to unclench the hands that were strangling him. The car, losing control, slid across the road and was literally crushed by the oncoming truck. The bodies of the two men were barely cut from the wreckage of the car. Jennifer was devastated by this news. She had just thought that life was getting better. She would finally have a family. She'd be lying if she said she was so in love with Andrew. But she believed him, believed that they would be happy, that she and her son Jason would have someone to take care of her. And the worst part was that after the funeral, she realized she was expecting her late husband's child. So now she would be a single mother with 2 children, and her second child would face the same difficult fate as Jason. Why do they have to go through all this? Why is it worth only a little bit of rejoicing, but then comes new trouble, funerals, and hard times? Once again, she was cut off from her daily life for a while, and she didn't even know how Max Irving was doing. Meanwhile, he was convalescing and improving not only his health, but also his affairs, which had fallen into disrepair during his illness. The lawyer became a regular visitor to his chambers. The first thing he did was to start divorce proceedings with his wife. Then he tried to see if he could recover his assets. After all, Ethan's death had helped him solve some of his own problems. Jennifer, on the other hand, came to work after the funeral with weight loss and sunken eyes. It was clear without explanation that things were not going well for her. "What's wrong with you?" Jennifer Max asked, seeing her after a long absence. "Are you sick?" "It's not good here without you, no. I'm not sick," she sighed and couldn't help but cry as she recounted the misfortune that had befallen her. Max tried his best to calm her down, but Jennifer only waved her away. "Come on, I guess it's my fate. There's nothing I can do about it. How are you doing? I see you're getting ready to be discharged already." "Yes, I think I could be discharged right now, but I have some personal matters to take care of first, so I'm in no hurry to go back. I'm thinking of divorcing my wife." "What about her?" Jennifer was surprised, and she couldn't help but sympathize with women who found themselves in such a situation. She knew exactly what it was like to be alone and unsupported in such a situation, but she didn't sympathize. "Well, don't worry about her." Max waved her off. "What? She doesn't have kids. Leave her not naked and barefoot. Besides, she's got an education. She can get a job if she wants one, which I really doubt. She was used to taking care of herself, but this way she might find another husband. After all, if she doesn't drink, it's quite possible," Max said. As she started drinking, Jennifer was glad that at least she wasn't prone to that herself. "She has that weakness," Max replied without much sympathy. He knew that Diana, left without a lover and without a husband, had begun to drink more and more often, and to drink seriously. Perhaps in this way she wanted to sympathize with her ex-husband, to show how badly she felt alone, and thus to win him back. But Max did not think about anything like that. He was happy to be separated from this lying, sneaky traitor. If he hadn't known about the way she'd behaved, the way she'd planned the murder, he might have thought it wasn't worth divorcing. But now he didn't care at all what happened to her. Jennifer, on the other hand, had struggled hard to cope with her life's hardships without losing her humanity, eliciting in him fervent sympathy and empathy. During the time that she was not around, Max Irving realized that his attitude to this nurse is far beyond friendly. Only she herself was completely unconcerned. The last thing she was thinking about was her personal life. What kind of personal life could she have if she was pregnant? And sensing Max's interest in her, she tried to meet him less often. They should not be deceived and fill themselves with excessive hopes. All the more so because soon Max Irving was really discharged, and they had no opportunity to meet. They exchanged phone numbers just in case, but saw no reason to call each other. Neither had time. They both had their own things to do. Jennifer was getting ready to inherit an inheritance. At least there was one good thing about what had happened. Now she and her son had an apartment. There would be no need to wander around dormitories and spend money on living expenses. Going through the late Elizabeth's papers, she learned a lot more about Andrew's birth. He had told her that his mother had confessed before she died that he was adopted, but something more detailed apparently she hadn't had time to report. Now, from the documents Jennifer had found, she realized that her late husband and Max Irving were siblings. They had the same mother, and she died shortly after Andrew was born. Max's older son was given to an orphanage, and newborn Andrew was adopted by Elizabeth. She left him a small note, which the deceased did not find and therefore never had time to read. It informed him that he had a brother. She gave him his first and last name, and it was Max. Jennifer felt it necessary to inform Max Irving himself. The man was overjoyed by her call. "I'm sorry, Jennifer, I've been meaning to call you myself, but I've been hesitant to do so. I realize you're going through a lot of grief and worry, so I didn't dare bother you. I know it's for you and Andrew. I should be grateful to be alive," he said. "We couldn't have done otherwise," Max sighed. "I think Andrew somehow felt his kinship with me. I can't explain his involvement in any other way." "And what do you attribute your involvement to?" Annie asked. "Perhaps you felt that I cared for you," Max finally dared to ask. A relationship soon developed between them, even though Jennifer was expecting a baby. It was hard for her to understand how Max could love her, since she was pregnant by someone else. "And that doesn't affect you at all?" she asked in surprise. "But it's not from a stranger. It's from my own brother, whom I've never really gotten to know. But he helped me without knowing that we were related. and you are also very dear to me in this difficult time. I've been hesitant to tell you, knowing that you don't have time for this," Max said. Jennifer was, of course, not in the mood for any new relationship. She realized that now she was not in a position to build one. Even if she had awakened feelings for Max, it didn't give her the right to make any confessions, but it was very hard for her to be alone. She needed support, and so she didn't want to push Max away, especially after he had confessed his long-standing feelings to her. Soon after the birth of their daughter, they got married and became quite a happy family with 2 children. They were not going to stop with these 2. Max hasn't been to the small town where he was born and raised for a long time. Most of his life was spent here. The man spent almost a decade and a half in the capital. Once upon a time, he literally ran away to a big, noisy city, trying to hide from almost physical pain, disappointment, and bitterness. It was hard because I had to immediately solve a huge number of issues with housing, work, and so on. It was necessary to rebuild my life. All these worries distracted me and prevented me from plunging into black melancholy. Gradually, everything got better. Max came back to life. Now he has a large apartment in Washington, a high-paying job, even his own small business, which brings in more and more profit every year. And most importantly, Max has a new family, his beloved, loving wife, Veronica, and 2 wonderful twin daughters. Veronica is younger than Max. Perhaps this is precisely why, with her, he feels like a support and the head of the family. The young wife does not work, takes care of the house and children, and Max is the breadwinner and protector. An ideal model of social cell. With Helen, it was not like that at all. Max still didn't understand how to relate to his first wife. At first, when everything first happened, he both loved and hated her at the same time. It was an explosive mixture of feelings and emotions. Now the man has long calmed down. He has his own life, his own affairs and problems, but he still could not remember his ex-wife indifferently. Resentment, despair, disgust, and even hatred were replaced by a feeling of guilt, primarily in front of the children. I haven't seen Max's sons even once since he left Otradnoy at night from the only roadhouse at the ready. The man then, barely holding back tears, fought the desire to hit and destroy everything in order to give vent to his emotions. Would Max succeed in something in a new place, or would he disappear in the big city, disappear from the face of the earth? He hardly cared then. He was not in that state. The main thing is to stay away from Helen and preferably never hear or think about her again. It hurts too much. Trouble came to Max's measured life unexpectedly for him. Although his wife later assured that she had warned him many times and asked for attention and care. Well, yes, there was something like that, but Max didn't even pay attention to his wife's slight grumbling. It seemed to him that it was all from fatigue. Still, he maintains a large house and manages to look after the children. Of course, it's exhausting. Helen constantly demanded something from Max, and he dressed, in her opinion, incorrectly and joked inappropriately and behaved incorrectly with the children and did not help much around the house, and in general constantly shifted the solution of everyday issues to her, to his other half. Max did not take all these reproaches seriously. All wives scold their husbands, even the best ones. This is par for the course. So Helen grumbles with or without reason. Max considered himself an ideal family man. Firstly, most of the budget was on him. He worked long hours at his factory, often picking up extra shifts, and also that his family does not need anything. The man sincerely believed that this was quite enough. Helen, if she wanted, could not work at all. They wouldn't be luxurious, but they wouldn't die of hunger either. Max's salary would be enough for them all. But at first, the wife could not even think about leaving her school, where she worked as an English teacher. Max saw that she liked her work and had nothing against Helen, even at the expense of her everyday life, doing what she loved so much. And a certain amount in the family budget will never be superfluous. And Max took care of the children enough. Even as a child, he promised himself that he would not be like his own father. At first, he did not notice his only son and was absolutely indifferent to him. And then, when Max went to school and completely disappeared somewhere, it seems that he transferred small money to his mother, but he himself did not appear in his son's life. Of course, the mother did not skimp on expressions when discussing her former husband. Max knew from an early age what a scoundrel, traitor, and generally terrible person his father was. For some reason, hearing this was always painful and offensive. For a reason unknown to him, Max wanted to protect and justify his father. But arguing with your mother is not a good thing. Yes, and she's right. Their father really abandoned them, and even then, as an 8-year-old boy, Max made a promise to himself He would never be like his father, and so it turns out he did no better. When the resentment against his wife subsided, Max's heart began to ache for Stephen and Mary. They weren't to blame for anything at all. The thought that it would be necessary to establish communication with them often occurred to Max, but the children probably hate their father, who left them many years ago, so they won't even want to talk to him, most likely. And they will be right. I met Helen and Max at the birthday party of their mutual friend. It was a fun party at the Dasha. A lot of young people, loud music, laughter, dancing, wine flowing. We fried meat and walked along the riverbank at night. It was great. Max noticed Helen almost immediately. She's so modest, quiet compared to the other girls, and beautiful. No, not the beauty that was fashionable at that time, but as if from some kind of such faces can be found in Renaissance portraits. It wasn't that Max was particularly interested in art, but the teacher at their college was Helen in love with her subject. She managed to interest future welders in both painting and sculpture. So Max did understand something after all. So Helen amazed him from the very beginning. Big eyes, long, slightly wavy hair, slender figure. The most important thing is the look. It was immediately clear from him that he was a kind and sensitive person. Helen didn't flirt with Max or other young men like other girls, but sometimes the guy caught her eye. It was pleasant and exciting. Max understood that he should approach her and start a conversation, but he did not dare. He had no problems with other girls, and he joked with them easily. He could even afford to hug each of them. But Helen, she's completely different. How to approach it? Suddenly, when Max starts a conversation with Helen, she will understand how stupid and primitive he really is. And yet the guy overcame he invited Helen to slow dance when the appropriate song began to play. Well, finally, she smiled at him. I thought you'd never make up your mind. All these words confused Max. It turns out that Helen had been watching him all that evening and understood both his interest and indecision. That's how it goes. But most importantly, she was waiting for the guy to finally give her attention. I wanted this. This means only one thing. Did she like Max too? Yes, I liked it. And how? After that memorable evening, Helen and Max began dating. The girl said more than once that she felt happy and protected next to him, and so it was. Max was ready to move for the sake of his beloved mountain. The guy had already graduated from college and was working at a factory. A significant part of the salary was now spent on gifts for his beloved. Max chose things for the girl with great pleasure and tried to guess whether Helen would like this teddy bear or whether a bright silk scarf would suit her. This feeling was new to Max. He didn't know before that another person's joy could make you so happy. Helen was so cutely embarrassed when she received another gift. She was embarrassed that she herself could not answer her beloved in the same way. The girl did not work yet. She graduated from the Pedagogical University, Faculty of Languages. And this also warmed Max's soul. Other girls, on the contrary, tried to trick guys into giving them gifts. Max also had these. And Helen felt embarrassed that they were spending money on her. When Helen graduated from university, Max proposed to her. The girl didn't think for a long time and immediately agreed, which made the guy happy. The future spouses immediately faced many everyday issues, and the most important of them concerned living space. Helen lived with her parents, Max with his mother. Both wanted to start their family history in a separate area, so it was decided to rent an apartment. The young couple got married and rented an apartment in the city center. From this house, it was convenient for both to get to works. Max to the factory, and Helen to her school. Later, the household grindings with which parents on both sides frightened young people did not exist as such. Helen immediately took over the cleaning and cooking. Max was used only for particularly difficult tasks. Hanging curtains, fixing a faucet, screwing a door to a closet, nailing a shelf. There were no scandals or quarrels about this between the young spouses. By the way, sometimes Max voluntarily stood at the stove and spoiled his beloved with delicious meat or vegetable salad. He knew how to cook since childhood. His mother raised him to be fully capable and a citizen, and not a helpless wimp like his father. In a word, everything in the young family was wonderful. Max couldn't be happier with his happiness. They ended up with capricious, demanding wives. The guys sometimes complained about their spouses when they got together with someone after work, and Max had nothing to say about his Helen at such moments. Only then, years later, did Max begin to think about what was happening in his life, where maybe it was bad that Helen didn't express her complaints and wishes to him. Maybe even then her dissatisfaction with her husband began to accumulate. It would be better if she spoke directly about everything right away, rather than being so silent. She was silent, and then it burst out. Most likely, the modest, quiet wife was afraid of offending Max. Of course, something didn't suit her even then, but she remained silent out of delicacy and self-doubt. Yes, Helen had her own childhood traumas, hence her humility and desire to please everyone and her inability to defend her interests. In appearance, Max's wife's family seemed prosperous. In fact, Helen's father drank a lot. After getting drunk, he insulted his wife and daughter, showered them with threats, and threw things. This man pretty much spoiled the psyche of his own daughter, but of course did not admit it, believing that he did everything for the family. He brought in a good salary. It was like that. My father-in-law worked in the mines and earned a good salary. But how much work it cost Helen's mother to maintain her husband's human appearance. She made sure that he did not drink before the shift, listening to undeserved insults. Otherwise, the husband would lose his job, and the family, accordingly, would lose income. Times were hard. The mother could not allow this to happen, so she had to endure it. Helen was very ashamed of this state of affairs, so she did not confess everything to Max right away, but only on the eve of the wedding. The guy saw how hard this frankness cost the bride. Helen sincerely believed that, having learned the truth, Max would be able to leave her. Max, after the story, he hugged the girl tightly and promised that he would protect her from all troubles, and she would no longer have to suffer. This would not happen in their family. Everyone will be happy in it. Both her beloved modesty and lack of pretensions, all this, most likely, was a consequence of Helen's psychological trauma. Maybe for some, such parental behavior would have passed without a trace, but Helen was sensitive and anxious by nature. That's why she became so quiet, submissive, unsure of her own strengths and desires. Max, after hearing his beloved's story, thought for the first time that the absence of a father in a child's life could be even better than his presence. So he may have even been lucky that the negligent father wandered off into the sunset and didn't bother his ex-wife and son. Late about a year after the wedding, Helen told Max that she was expecting a child. The future father's happiness knew no bounds. Of course, it's a little scary and exciting to take responsibility for the life of a real person, your own child. But it was also great, because Max felt as if wings had grown behind his back. Will there really be 3 of us soon? Are we really going to have a real family now? Max still couldn't come to his senses from the good news. He either hugged Helen or walked around the room in excitement. I can't believe it either, Helen admitted. Moreover, I don't feel any changes in my body at all. It's as if there's nothing. But the doctor confirmed the term is already 2 months. So we will soon become parents. The issue of housing again became acute for the couple. Helen did not want to bring the baby into a rented apartment, and Max completely agreed with her on this. When the spouse goes on maternity leave, it will be difficult for them to get a mortgage. Extra 2 dependents still, Max's official income may not be enough to approve the deal. Therefore, you need to act now and urgently, while your wife's pregnancy is not yet noticeable. And in general, it's not enough to just buy an apartment. You also need to have time to make repairs to it before the birth of the child. And the search for housing began. Max and Helen then traveled all over the city and looked at probably 100 apartments. But, oddly enough, they didn't like any of them. Either the area was not suitable, or the condition was not satisfactory, or both spouses did not like the atmosphere in the apartment. It's just that my soul wasn't in it, that's all. And then suddenly one day, Helen came across an advertisement for the sale of a house in the suburbs. The couple did not look in that direction. Both seemed to be on Helen's mind for the apartment. But this is home. Helen's owner urgently left for another country, and therefore gave away the housing for next to nothing. The couple went and inspected the house, and both were absolutely delighted. They literally fell in love with this cozy brick building, surrounded by a magnificent cherry orchard. The yard is big. We could make a playground for the children. Helen was happy. How convenient it will be to walk here with the kids. Just imagine. Well, in the spring, when the cherries bloom in this garden, it's probably just magical. There's also a garage here. Max was happy. I'm still thinking about getting a car in the future. The rooms are spacious and there is a balcony. You can also put a gazebo in the center of the garden and it will be absolutely beautiful. In general, the couple unanimously decided that they would live only in this wonderful house. The mortgage was issued quickly. Everything went without problems. Yes, Max now had to transfer most of his salary to the bank every month, and this was expected to happen for many years. But it was worth it. Valen and Max enthusiastically set about arranging their nest. They repasted the wallpaper in the rooms, partially updated the furniture, painted something, repaired something. These were very pleasant chores. Max protected his pregnant wife from work as best he could. He did a great job with the repairs himself. Sometimes, however, he called friends for help, but Helen really wanted to do something herself in a cozy, beloved home, and she worked to the best of her ability. By the time the first child was born, everything was ready. My son's nursery resembled a picture from a fashion magazine. Light blue wallpaper with cars, a white crib. There were also stylish shelves and a spacious, reliable closet, comfortable diapers, and of course, young parents did not have significant financial resources at that time, and everything was bought on occasion or at discounts and promotions. However, the couple were able to do it. They managed it. Stephen was born at full term. He was a wonderful and problem-free child. Of course, there were sleepless nights, but Helen coped with everything, took care of her son, and managed to do housework. I was tired, of course. Therefore, from time to time, Max arranged fasting days for the young mother and ordered food from the restaurant. True, it was often impossible to do this. The mortgage took a lot of money, and now he worked alone. There wasn't much money, but nothing. They didn't live in poverty. Max was now trying to take on more work. He had to feed his family. The man felt that he had a huge responsibility. It is he who must ensure the well-being of his wife and child, but Max was still happy. Then he had a clear understanding that everything in his life was going exactly as it should. Helen, however, now periodically grumbled, which was almost never observed before, whether she doesn't have enough attention or the careless father doesn't do much with his son. But that's just the little things. The wife is simply tired, and she probably understands that Max simply cannot entertain his entire small family after a hard shift. Then the head of the family definitely needs to rest. Otherwise, which of him is a worker in the morning? Helen understands all this. She cannot help but understand. Grumpy. So she is a weak woman, she is allowed to. Max was lenient about this. Stephen grew up quickly. Just yesterday he was a baby, and now he is an inquisitive and active boy, asking 1,000 questions per second. Max loved playing with his son every evening. No matter how tired the man was, he devoted at least half an hour to the child. They played tag, put together puzzles, construction sets, and just went wild on the floor in the nursery. It's a shame Max didn't get to spend more time with his son. Work and fatigue took their toll, and yet the man considered himself an ideal parent. He and Helen were unlucky with their fathers, but Stephen has a completely different future ahead of him, and now Stephen is almost 3 years old. He started going to kindergarten. Helen got ready for work. She was a little worried about how it would be to combine work and a child, but she was also happy. Max saw that his wife was already bored at home. She always liked school, students, lessons. Max was happy for his wife. She bought herself new things for work. I walked around so happy, in anticipation of change, and Max was happy. Still, now financial responsibility will not only be on his shoulders. Of course, he earns a lot more. And yet, knowing that the other half also takes on part of the total budget is somehow calmer. And then it suddenly became clear that Helen was pregnant again. This news did not cause such joy as the news of the first pregnancy. Helen cried and blamed Max for everything. He did not respond to unfair reproaches. He understood that it was so difficult for his wife. Well, maybe you should go to the hospital, Max suggested awkwardly. We are not ready for a second child. You're not ready in the first place. My son has just grown up. You could at least rest a little, but here comes the baby again. Yes, your body probably hasn't recovered from the first birth. He can't bear such a burden now. Max felt sorry for the baby that was now developing under his wife's heart. He's no worse than Stephen, their adorable, smart son. But Max loved his wife much more than this still unknown child. Helen's health and happiness were dearer to it. Helen at first seemed to be in the mood for an interruption. I even went to the antenatal clinic and got a referral, but she couldn't take this step. Max supported his wife. It's okay, we can handle it. He hugged Helen, who was sobbing from the abundance of emotions and feelings. Let's break through. Everything will be fine with us. You are so good to me. Helen pressed herself closer to her husband, as if seeking protection. What a blessing that I have you. Billy was born a little premature. For some reason, the second pregnancy turned out to be more difficult. Helen had to go to save every now and then. Max at this time was left alone with his son, who was already going to kindergarten. It was the garden that turned out to be a salvation because he couldn't quit his job to look after the child. After all, someone has to support the family. It turned out to be difficult. In the morning, it was necessary to wake up the baby, dress him, and take him to the garden, then rush to work, plow there until the evening dawn. Then I run to the garden again, doing some shopping along the way, and at home cooking, cleaning, washing. Stephen also demanded to play with him, but Max was ready to endure these temporary difficulties for the sake of the happiness of his family. The baby was born a little earlier than planned, only a month and a half away from normal, and the baby's appearance was strikingly different from what Max had imagined, already being the father of one child. A tiny, wrinkled, bright red face, arms, legs like twigs, almost transparent skin stretched out over protruding tiny ribs. The baby didn't look much like the strong, pink-cheeked Stephen. He immediately resembled a baby from an advertisement, and the girl's appearance evoked both aching tenderness and anxiety. Max's heart sank with pity as he looked at this fragile child lying in a ditch. Doctors did not give any prognosis. Mary turned out to be smart. She did it. True, while the girl was fighting for her life, her parents spent all this time in great anxiety. Fortunately, a couple of months after birth, their daughter was discharged from the hospital as a relatively healthy child. The baby immediately became everyone's favorite. Her grandparents' parents, older brother, and relatives doted on this little one. Either caused something about her from the very beginning. Either charisma or charm, clearly something innate. Looking at his daughter smiling at the world from the stroller, Max was glad that he and Helen had made the right decision. If the couple had chickened out then, if Helen had finally gotten rid of the unplanned baby, this miracle with huge, curious eyes simply would not have happened. Scary to imagine. When Helen and her daughter returned home, Max breathed a sigh of relief. Now again, all household chores and problems were on the shoulders of the wife. Helen did well. The house was always clean and smelled of delicious food, and the children looked well-groomed and happy. Max was happy to return to his cozy nest after a hard day at work. True, the wife again began to grumble quietly. She wanted Max to take on more household responsibilities. Why, if she did a great job herself? Max, however, fully provided for the family financially. To each his own. The husband is the breadwinner, the wife is the keeper of the hearth. Helen made an ideal hearth keeper. Max constantly told her about this. Knowing for some reason such compliments did not particularly please my wife. Strange. Max was not a completely inattentive and insensitive spouse. Sometimes he arranged for Helen to have relaxing evenings and let her go out with her friends, and at this time he himself remained with the children and periodically got rid of his wife's cooking. He ordered delivery from a restaurant and took his family to resorts every year, so the man's conscience was clear. Things were looking up for Max at work. The young, intelligent specialist was noticed and began to be promoted. Soon the man was appointed head of the workshop, which had a very good effect on his salary. At that time, Mary had just turned 3 years old. My daughter started going to kindergarten. Helen thought about going to work again. True, now with 2 children in her arms, she was even more worried. How will I manage everything? Helen lamented. Children need so much attention. They have clubs and sections. Who will drive them now? And in general, devote time all day to other people's children and see your own only in the evening. But you don't have to go to work yet, Mike noted reasonably. He had been considering this option for a long time but had not discussed it with his wife. Max was silent only because he was sure that Helen could not live without her school. And here it is. The wife, it turns out, doesn't want to leave maternity leave herself like this. What's it like not going to work? Helen didn't understand. Yes, very simple. I earn enough. It's enough for us. So don't rush. Stay calm at home and take care of the children. Moreover, Stephen will soon go to first grade. It needs to be prepared. And then lessons. Helen thought about this proposal for about 2 days, weighed the pros and cons, hesitated, and then made her final decision. Yes, you're right, she said at dinner, looking into her husband's eyes. Probably in our situation, it's really better for me to take care of the children. That's great. Max was happy. He suddenly felt like a mountain had been lifted from his shoulders. Nothing will change. Your home will be just as warm and cozy. and now he can handle the financial side of the issue quite well alone. In the years that his wife was on maternity leave, Max made good progress in his career. Everything worked out in the best way for the family. Time flew by at great speed. Max worked, the children grew up, Helen took care of the house and heirs, periodically sighing about her ruined career. No, she tried to go to work several times, but very quickly realized that the salary was not worth the effort. At home, everything suddenly deteriorated. The children were slipping in their studies, permanent bedlam settled in the rooms. The family ate pasta, sausages, and other obviously unhealthy food made in haste, and then Mary was constantly sick. First one thing, then another. These were the consequences of prematurity. Nothing seemed so serious and critical, but nevertheless, Helen had to travel with her daughter to doctors. So, experiments with work for Helen ended almost as soon as they began. It's okay, the children will grow up. We'll catch up, Max reassured. It's good for you to talk, Helen sighed. What a great guy you are. Already a big boss. I'm proud of you, I really am, but it's also a shame for myself. Years of study, it turns out, were in vain. Housekeeping is all she... At such moments, Max hugged Helen, hugged her tightly, and reassured her. He really appreciated what his wife did for the family. A clean house, delicious hot lunches and dinners, successful children thanks to constant attention. It's just a dream, a fairy tale. There is no need to wish for more. But Helen's complaints about the lack of implementation of communication with colleagues and personal growth, Max did not take them seriously. And what is Helen worried about? Would she really change places with her peers who carried children and worked from morning to evening and carried on everyday life? And of course, look the part. The spouse does not understand his happiness. Well, it's okay, it's not scary. The main thing is that Helen is the right wife. Her husband and children are her priority. It's so cozy, warm, and easy to live in the world. Max believed that he had many years of a happy family life ahead of him, and then a calm, prosperous old age close to his beloved wife and surrounded by children and grandchildren. But fate decreed otherwise. Open a women's club or something like that. It seems like a place where local ladies gather to read books, hold discussions on certain issues, chat about pressing topics like staying fit, raising children, and recipes, and so on. I thought that in our city there are many women who, like me, are literally locked within four walls. Helen explained to her husband with inspiration. Surely I will have clients. Moreover, we don't have anything like this in our city yet. The niche is not occupied. Well, I do not know. Max shook his head. He didn't think that his wife would have many potential clients in their small town. Still a deep province. The average salary in the city is low. This is how he managed to get to the right place at the right time. Hence the prosperity. Not everyone is so lucky. They don't have a capital. After all, for there to be so many unemployed, bored ladies here. You will give me money to develop my business, right? Helen's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. Max sighed and explained to his wife why her idea was doomed to failure. With every word he said, the woman's eyes became sadder. The corners of her mouth drooped down. Max understood that he was telling his beloved the hard truth. He was sorry to disappoint Helen, but she should know what she was getting into. And in the end, Max simply doesn't want to throw money away. It's not so easy for him to get them anymore. No, if Helen wanted expensive jewelry, a new fur coat, or a trip to the resort, you are always welcome. But spending a decent amount of money on a castle in the air, which will undoubtedly burst immediately, well, no. Probably, having received a refusal from her husband, Helen finally decided something for herself. Max understood everything later, only later, when he calmed down a little and was able to analyze the situation. Then he should have helped his wife, given her money, supported her, and he behaved, to put it mildly, ugly. To hell with them, with money, let them disappear, but the warm, trusting relationship between the spouses would remain. And anyway, who knows, maybe Helen's idea would have worked. By the way, only later Max realized that this was exactly what he was afraid of. Helen will become wealthy, successful, financially independent. And what does she need it for then? The man liked to feel like the breadwinner and protector of the family. But Max also realized this too late. And when I realized it, I was horrified. Was he really that selfish? It's strange how Helen didn't divorce him sooner. Some more time passed. It seems that outwardly nothing has changed, but still Helen has become different. Max didn't notice it right away, but then he realized it. Of course, the previously cheerful, attentive wife became somehow alien, cold, distant. If earlier, when she met her husband from work, she joyfully shared with him the news of the day and bombarded him with questions, now she was more and more silent, thinking about something of her own. You can't get too many words out of her. But I stopped grumbling about it, and without it. No, this did not affect the quality of cleaning and cooking. Lunches and dinners were still excellent, and the house was sparkling clean, but he was worried about Helen's condition. He tried as best he could to please her, bought gifts for no reason, took the children for a walk to give his wife a rest. All these attempts did not change the situation in any way. Max drove himself into anxious thoughts. Eventually, we'll stop. Why should she complain about life? Why should she suddenly be sad? Her husband fully provides for the whole family, and at a quite decent level. Helen herself has the opportunity not to work, but to take care of the house and children. Yes, all her friends are jealous of her. Everyone would like to be in her place. Max calmed himself down and plunged headlong into his work. The boss just got involved in a new project, so Max sometimes had to spend the night in the office. There was good money at stake. Max still believed that he had a reliable back at home. The wife is caring, sensitive, kind, faithful. So it was, is, and will be. How wrong the man. We need to talk, Helen greeted her husband with these words from work that evening. Max sat in the office with a report. It took a long time to tinker with it, but I managed to do everything. The children were already asleep in their rooms. It seems that Stephen had a chess tournament today, and Max, being too busy, didn't even call to find out how his son was. This is probably what Helen wants to talk about. She, of course, wants more attention, but what can she do? Max adores his family, but someone has to earn a comfortable life because he is trying for them. The man prepared to make excuses for forgetting about an important event. Of course, he will ask for forgiveness, and tomorrow he will buy his son some kind of reward. We'll definitely buy it. But the topic of the evening conversation turned out to be completely unexpected. We need to get a divorce. Helen looked her husband straight in the eyes with a serious, cold gaze. The face is calm and confident. The woman had clearly thought it through, weighed everything, and no longer doubted that she was doing the right thing. Max blinked his eyes in confusion. Unlike his wife, he was not ready for such a conversation. It was as if he had been hit on the head with a bag of sand. Even my eyes grew dark. It's obvious that we're not on the same path, Helen sighed. Every year I become more and more convinced of this. I tried to tell you, I tried to fix everything. Remember how many times I told you, but you don't understand me at all and seem to see me only as a service staff. I can't do that. I feel like I'm losing myself and I don't like it at all. It scares me. It's not true, Max objected. I love you. I love you sincerely and with all my heart. You are my closest person. It only seems to you, Helen sighed again. You love the image that you yourself created. A cozy housewife, a comfortable life partner, a good mother. What about my interests? My career, self-realization. That's the problem. It's not a problem. I'll give you money for your business. How much do you need? Reminding? It's already late. Helen shook her head. I don't need anything from you. I have already found money, even sponsors who believed in me and my project and are willing to risk their capital. So even better. It's nice to know that I am moving towards my goals on my own, achieving everything myself. But with you, I feel bad and stuffy. It's like you're dragging me down. We need to get a divorce before it's too late. We are still young. You still have time to arrange your personal life. It will be better this way. I don't want to live without you. I can't. Max kept trying to find the right words. How to convey to Helen how dear she is to him. How to convince her that everything will be fine with them. He will improve, for sure. Max, I know you well. Maybe even better than yourself. Helen smiled for the first time since the beginning of the conversation. That's why I'm sure that you can and will even be happy. Sure. And the children, how are they without a father? Children. Helen grinned. You might think you spend a lot of time with them now. Don't worry about your children. No one is going to deprive you of them. And I couldn't have done it even if I wanted to. You will also see each other, communicate, and walk together. If you want, of course not. No one will Max spent a long time convincing Helen to come to her senses, swore his love, and promised to improve. Bargained even, it seems, threatened. But Helen stood her ground. She firmly decided for herself that she could not live with Max because he supposedly limits her, does not see her as a talented and successful person, and this cuts off her wings and takes away her energy. As a result, Max slammed the door and left his dear and cozy home. Once upon a time, this place was for him a quiet, warm haven where he could hide from life's hardships and work troubles. But now here he was hurt, trampled, humiliated. Max got behind the wheel, pressed the gas pedal all the way, and rushed through the deserted dark streets. Where should he go? The man didn't know this, but he definitely didn't want to return home. As a result, Max ended up on the bank of a river flowing outside the city. I sat right on the grass, wet from the evening dew, and looked at the large stars. Tears were streaming down my cheeks. It's good that no one saw him at that moment. Pathetic, confused, humiliated, disgusted with myself. Feelings changed at a dizzying speed. Resentment. He did so much for the family. He disappeared at work for days, just so that his children and wife did not need anything. Yes, and Helen, to the best of his ability, tried to help around the house and with the baby, but they trampled him like that, put him out the door, like someone unnecessary, useless, disgustingly unpleasant. Anger. How dare she? What does she think she is? I sat at home all this time, rested, and wandered around the resorts. And then it suddenly turns out that Max limited her in everything and did not allow her to develop. Fear. Will he really be left alone now? Max is used to the fact that everything in his life goes according to plan. Career, strong family, ideal situation. He liked to return to his cozy nest. He liked to see how wonderful his children were growing up and what. Now it's all over. Max moved into a rented apartment. I couldn't stay at home. It was too painful and too hard. Helen called him. They needed to settle a lot of domestic and legal issues. Max spoke to his wife reluctantly. These conversations caused him almost physical pain. With secret gloating, the man detected notes of guilt in his wife's voice. Of course, she sees how hard it is for him and understands perfectly why her husband is now in such a state. She's probably suffering. She's still conscientious. That's what she needs. Max hoped that Helen would change her mind. Sometimes he tried to convince his wife that there was no need to rush, but the woman gently stuck to her line. She was serious about getting a divorce and a completely new life. The divorce took place by court decision. All jointly acquired property was divided between the spouses. Car, house, funds, and bank accounts. According to Max, this is not a particularly fair decision, given that he earned the money for all this. Helen hardly worked during her marriage, but you can't argue with the law. Max was still in a lot of pain. He lived in a rented apartment and tried to forget himself at work. The man deliberately took on difficult tasks so as not to be left alone with sad thoughts. Max kept the car, which actually belonged to both him and Helen. But Helen and the children lived in their common house. As long as it stays that way, this was a mutual agreement between the now former spouse. Max had no idea how long the period of limbo would last. Several months passed before he regained the ability to think calmly and reason adequately. Then a more or less acceptable image of the future took shape. Max will pull himself together, work hard, pay child support, and buy an apartment with more. Well, his income is good. He can handle it. It will be necessary to determine the order of meetings with the son and daughter. Max didn't want to lose touch with them. He dreaded the prospect of becoming a father like his own. The man planned to actively participate in the lives of his son and daughter. As for Helen, she is now actively developing her business. She seems to be doing well, so Max shouldn't have doubted her. Helen is very busy and needs support. Max will show it to his soulmate. Perhaps then Helen will understand what a good, reliable, noble person her now ex-husband is and will return to him, and everything will be as before. Max's hopes were not destined to come true. He recovered a little from the shock when another surprise hit him. That evening, Max decided to walk to the shopping center to buy himself something for dinner. I deliberately chose the long road through the park to warm up a little. It was a wonderful warm evening. There were a lot of people in the park. Couples in love, parents with children, crowds of walking teenagers. He didn't notice Helen right away. At first, Max almost walked past his wife. The eye accidentally caught on the light yellow dress that suited Helen so well, especially at the end of summer when she was already tanned. Helen walked hugging a young man. He looked at her with loving eyes and carefully caught her every word. Helen looked happy and very beautiful. It was clear that she liked being around this man. So she met someone, hence the divorce and division of property. And these conversations are about misunderstandings. Max suppressed the urge to approach the happy couple and start a scandal. He turned around and hurried home. In the apartment, Max gave vent to his emotions, slammed a plate on the floor, and smashed his knuckles against the concrete wall. All these measures helped little. Helen seemed so right, so reliable, and suddenly it turns out that she has a lover. So maybe this is some kind of far-fetched misunderstanding that is to blame for the divorce. That same evening, Max called his wife and demanded an explanation. "Did you see me with Andy?" Helen was not at all embarrassed. "Yes, we are together now, but I didn't deceive you while we were married. There was no relationship between me and him." Max still couldn't help himself. He unleashed a torrent of vicious insults on his ex-wife. He wanted her to be in his place, to feel his pain. But Helen just hung up. Nothing. Max shouted into the emptiness of the rented apartment, "I will take revenge on you again, so that it won't seem enough." At first, the man wanted to punish this Andy, beat him up, or do something more sophisticated. I found out more about him. It turned out that Andy worked as an ordinary psychologist at a local energy company. No power, no money. Yes, average. And how could he hook Helen? Why does she need this loser? Maybe Andy even set his sights on Helen because of her house. And what? There are a lot of square meters. The location is good. Helen, if you judge it that way, is an inviable bride despite having 2 children. House. How long did it take them to choose it, and with what pleasure did they arrange it? Will it really now have a new owner, this same Andy? But this is Max. It was Max who earned this house with his hump, who invested so much money, labor, and soul into "You want to see a quiet life?" Max grinned. A plan for revenge has already matured in his head. At that moment, the man did not even think about the consequences. The main thing is to take revenge on his wife, to disrupt her plans for a happy, carefree life with her new gentleman. Max immediately began looking for a buyer for his part of the house. He decided to leave the city, leave his high-paying job, his friends, his career, and move to Washington to start all over again. It's just that in a small town, everything reminded us of a happy past. It was unbearable, too painful, too hard. Max was going to sell his part of the house, but not to the first candidate he came across. A drunk and senile grandmother or large family of migrants. A cheerful company was needed for the unfaithful wife so that life would not seem like honey to her. Max was not interested in money. He would earn it later. The main thing is to annoy your ex-wife. Let her understand that without him she is nothing. Let her see how insignificant her lover is. Many years later, Max could not understand himself then, why he did not think about his own children. They were not to blame for anything. Why do they need it? Max was too blinded by hatred and jealousy to think about such things. His nature yearned for revenge, and he behaved very rudely towards Helen. The ex-wife was right, she divorced him, and accordingly, she had every right to her personal life. Max's anger and rage were unjustified. People responded to advertisements for sale. Max received dozens of calls every day. Of course, this offer was more than profitable. Half of a large house in a good area of the city. Almost the price of a dorm room. Everyone was somehow too prosperous. They won't make life particularly difficult. We need someone more interesting, more colorful. And then one day, a young guy contacted Max. It was a poor student from some village. He came to the city and rented an apartment from an old woman. The guy decided that it would be cheaper for him to take out a loan and pay a much smaller amount to the bank every month than he gave to the elderly tenant. And here, consider it, he will pay for his own. Max thought about it. Student. That's good. Very good. The young man will probably take friends and have noisy parties. Helen will definitely not seem a little. With sons the very next day, Max met with a potential buyer in a cafe to discuss all the details, and then go together to inspect the house. The student turned out to be a very young guy. Thin with thick glasses, pimply, and somewhat homely. The entire ridiculous appearance of the potential buyer had nothing to do with his confident voice and the firm look of his gray eyes. Max wondered if this mattress could give his wife a fun life. Somewhat quiet. It is immediately clear that he is unpopular. It's hard to imagine this student as the organizer of a noisy party. Anyway, all the same, Helen is in for a very unpleasant surprise. A stranger in the house. Few people would like this. When Max. It's time for Max to hurry up. He left the factory and has already found a place for himself in Washington. They are expecting him in a week, so we need to finish all our work and fly off to a new life. Helen, of course, was very surprised. She also glanced with hostility at the student, who was looking around the rooms with an imperturbable expression. But the ex-wife was silent. What could she say? It was Max's full right to sell his half of the house. It suits me. The boy finally smiled. No, So that's great. Tomorrow then we will settle all legal issues. Let's finalize the deal. Well, move in and live. What are you doing? Helen shouted into the phone. She dialed Max immediately after the door closed behind the visitors. I didn't start a scandal in front of the student. There was desperation in her voice. Do you ever know something about him? About the person whom he placed with his own children? I don't know anything at all. Max answered his ex-wife calmly. But you will soon get to know him very well. I hope you have a normal relationship, but I'm confident in you. You always seem to find a common language with young people. Maybe you'll thank me again. Oh, you. Helen burst into an angry tirade. Max didn't listen to the end. Just hung up. My soul felt a little lighter. Now Helen is truly upset, and that's putting it mildly. It's okay, he'll survive. Let her negotiate with the student and look for money to buy out his share. And this guy seems to be no slouch. He won't give up what he has so easily. He will try to profit from this situation, or attempts to see right through the young buyer. A poor guy from the village dreaming of getting hooked in the city. And then suddenly, such luck. No, he won't waste his chance. He won't let him down. Max was sure of this. Let it finally dawn on her that without her ex-husband, she is nothing. And this Andy will not help her in any way. He's not a man at all. Maybe the lover will even go into the fog when he realizes that there are problems. Soon Max flew to Washington. At the new job, I had to learn everything again, delve into many nuances. And then there were pressing issues, finding housing, arranging life. And it was great because the man had no time or energy left for sad thoughts about what. The salary was good, such that Max had previously never dreamed of even in his leadership position. But most of the earnings were given out in an envelope unofficially. All the better. You will receive less alimony. Oddly enough, Max again didn't think about children. It was as if some kind of Helen was standing before my eyes. This is what resentment means. Years passed. Max again achieved career heights, now much greater than before. And how could it be otherwise if he devoted himself entirely to work? What else could he do to distract himself? Of course, such diligence yielded results. The man tried not to remember about his ex-wife. At first, it was very painful, then it was embarrassing. Finally, time also played a role when you don't see people for a long time. Don't communicate with them, they become like strangers. Max regularly paid child support to his daughter and son, but he did not maintain communication with his children and wife. Sometimes, out of curiosity, I looked through Helen's social networks. He saw photographs of his happy ex-wife and the once-hated Andy, who never ran away anywhere. Children growing up and felt less and less feelings for these people and the situation itself. I knew that Helen and the children were alive and well. This was quite enough. At first, the ex-wife tried to initiate communication between the children and has she forgiven Max? He did not know. But Helen really wanted, for the connection between father and children to remain intact. You, like no one else, should understand how important it is for children to have a father in their lives, Helen convinced her ex-husband over the phone. You told me many times how hard it was for you without your dad. Max categorically did not want any communication at all. Ideally, he dreamed of starting a new life. It was as if nothing had happened. He never asked Helen any questions. What was it like to live in a family with a neighbor who unexpectedly fell on their head? How did they get out of the situation, and did they get out? All this no longer concerned Max. He had his own plans, his own concerns. Several more years passed. Max met the beautiful Veronica at a corporate party. A slender, tall, relaxed, and very determined young lady. Somehow, everything started spinning quickly for them. In general, 3 months after they met, Veronica announced she was pregnant, and Max proposed to her. So what? The man was already tired of his bachelor life. He wanted home comfort and warmth. There were financial resources for the family. So why wait? Veronica turned out to be a very obedient wife. Perhaps the age difference played a role. The new wife was much younger than Max. She asked her husband's opinion on any matter, constantly complimented him, looked after him, and never grumbled. Everything suited her. This was very flattering for Max. Soon 2 wonderful twin girls appeared in the family. Max became a father again, this time more attentive and caring than before. The man took into account past mistakes. He now knew that children vitally needed the presence of both mom and dad nearby, and did not spare time and warmth for his little daughters. You are the perfect father, the perfect husband. Veronica often exclaimed. How lucky I was that we met by chance. Then, Max smiled back. He was happy too. Years ago, leaving in upset feelings into the unknown, the man could not imagine that someday all this would happen in his life. Beautiful, loving wife, children, career. This time, Max was more attentive to his wife. He was sensitive to the changes in her mood. Veronica herself decided not to work. Just like Helen. Once upon a time, a young wife devoted herself to family, but the difference was still present. She clearly did not feel disadvantaged in any way. She was sincerely happy about Max's gifts, enjoyed cleaning and cooking, and tinkered with the children a lot. At the same time, she didn't forget about herself. Several times a week, she left the little ones in the care of a nanny, while she and her friends went to a fitness club or bar. Max did not think about his ex-wife and older children for a long time. It was easier for him that way. Stephen and Mary have already become adults. Neither daughter nor son expressed a desire to find their father and talk to him. Max was rather happy about this because he didn't know what to talk about with his grown-up children. And then suddenly the man found himself thinking about them often. How did they live all these years? Are his children happy? Maybe they need help. Max decided that he should take the first step. Yes, it will be difficult. Surely both Helen and the children hate him, and deservedly so. Helen honestly tried for a long time to establish communication between her son, daughter, and her father, and she did the right thing. She is right. It is really important for children to have a father in their life. Just how long can you bang your head against a concrete wall? So Helen gave up. She failed to reach her ex-husband through his anger and resentment. Veronica saw that something was wrong with her husband. She was always sensitive and attentive. Are you worried about the children? One day she decided to talk. You can't hide anything from you. Max smiled sadly. Yes, it's not difficult to guess at all. The woman shrugged. You even pronounce their names in your sleep sometimes. I see how hard it is for you. It's hard. What will you do now? I have so much to do with my time that I can't straighten it out. Yes, you stumbled. But you can also understand. You were in shock and felt betrayed. You were not capable of adequate thoughts and actions. It's like a state of passion. You've got so much going on, but, it's never too late to fix everything. As long as everyone is alive, it's never too late. Nah, do you think so? Max looked at his wife with interest. Just go there. Veronica put her hand on the man's shoulder. Go and talk to them. Whatever happens, you will feel better. You see, it's hard for me to see you so sad. Thank you, Max hugged Veronica with gratitude. No matter how bad a person he was, fate was always favorable to him. And Max's work worked out well, and the people around him turned out to be wonderful. When a conversation with his wife inspired Max and gave him strength and determination. Yes, Max will go to his hometown and meet with his ex-wife and older children, and so Max again found himself in the city of his childhood and youth. It turns out that he had already forgotten how dusty, narrow the streets are here, and how unusually few people there are on the streets. It's quiet around, not at all like in Washington. The man decided to walk home. I walked from the hotel itself through almost half the city, but still did not feel tired. On the contrary, the movement seemed to give strength. Max is already close. All he has to do is turn the corner, and he will see the house that was once so dear to his heart. The man was overcome with excitement. The house has changed a lot. Previously, it was an ordinary brick building. Now it is a stylish structure with geometric patterns, large windows, and a superstructure. The cherry orchard has turned into a mini park with a tiled fountain, paths, and statues. The most amazing thing is that the central part of the territory was now occupied by a swimming pool. How is this even possible? The site and the building itself were transformed beyond recognition. If it weren't for the address sign, Max wouldn't have believed his eyes. The house resembled the creation of a modern designer, and a very expensive one at that. By the way, Max saw similar projects in fashion magazines that he sometimes came across. One man, as if struck by thunder, looked at his once home and did not understand anything. How the house has changed so much. Who lives here now? Clearly not Helen anymore. She would hardly have had enough money for such an architect and for all these additions and improvements. This is a fortune. Max knew that his wife's business was thriving, and yet it was not such a profitable project that she could afford it. Most likely, Helen moved somewhere. Some local oligarch now lives here. But there's only one way to know for sure. Max decisively stepped towards the gate and pressed the bell button. A few moments later, a tanned, slender woman in house shorts and a long men's t-shirt slipped out of the house. Her hair is pulled back into a high ponytail, sneakers on feet. Max immediately recognized the owner of the house, Helen, and was happy and confused at the same time. He was already in the mood for a conversation with strangers who bought a house from his ex-wife. Seeing Max, Helen raised his eyebrows in surprise. She looked simply super fit, slim, well-groomed. I nodded. Max let Shelley in. The man was ready for a more than cool meeting. Still, many years ago, he acted rudely to his family. First, he sold half of the house to a poor student and then disappeared completely. He paid child support but never congratulated his son or daughter on his birthday. Didn't meet the children, essentially abandoned them. Yes, he was motivated by resentment, but this is no excuse for an adult. Max behaved like the ultimate scoundrel and traitor. It's a pity that the realization came so late. It seemed to him that Helen should hate him, but she smiled, and so warmly, they walked through the garden, which had changed beyond recognition. Max, looking around and around, was more and more surprised. Helen, seeing this, smiled mysteriously. The designer also clearly worked on the interior decoration of the house. Everything around said that the family living here was clearly not experiencing financial difficulties. "Wow," Max said, looking around the hall. "Does your business bring in that kind of money?" "Business is booming." "You're right," Helen smiled. "And yet, we could not afford such a house. This is a different story. By the way, I tried to call you many times to thank you, but you didn't pick up." He was a fool. Max lowered his head. "If you only knew how much I repent of this. I missed everything I could in the lives of my own children. They probably hate me now, and rightly so." "You're wrong." Helen's eyes became serious and sad. "Yes, you really missed a lot. But I found words to explain your behavior to the children. Don't worry. They grew up to be understanding and sensitive people. We're still waiting to meet you and waiting for you to be ready. As for your feelings of guilt, then consider that you have already received punishment. You have punished yourself. Stephen and Mary have brought me so much joy over the years, and you were deprived of this." Max sighed heavily. "Tell me about them, please." Helen happily began talking about the children. This gives every mother special pleasure. It turns out that Stephen is a talented chess player, goes to tournaments all over the world, wins prizes, and is studying to become an economist. He himself decided not to leave home for now. Mary became interested in robotics from an early age. A childhood hobby determined the choice of profession. Now the girl is studying at the university, where she entered on her own without bribes or tutoring. In fact, she was enrolled in the course while she was still in 10th grade. The girl then won some kind of rating competition. There are even several articles about it on the internet. Max was glad that his children turned out to be so successful, smart, and kind. Helen took a plump photo album from the shelf and began showing her ex-husband photographs of Stephen and Irina. The man seemed to be getting to know his own children again. They were already so old and very beautiful. How could he be such a fool that he missed important milestones in life? "Tell me about yourself," Max asked. "How did you raise 2 children on your own and even achieve such success?" "And I wasn't alone." Helen shook her head. "Andy was always nearby. He quit and devoted all his time to developing our common business. Well, Andrew also helped us, and we all stood together for him during a difficult period." "Andrew?" Max was surprised. "Who else is this?" "That poor and, as it turned out, incredibly talented and promising student to whom you sold your part of the house." Before Max's eyes stood a thin boy with glasses covered in teenage acne. How could he help Helen? Noticing the confusion and surprise of her ex-husband, Helen said, "Andrew is just a gift of fate. At first, I was angry that he moved into our house. I scolded you with the last words. It was you who brought him. I was worried that the young man would start bringing groups of girls to his place, and they would wander around the house at night. What peace there is here." And then it turned out that Andrew is that rare student who is focused only on his studies. He studied at the architecture department and seemed to be seriously interested in specialized subjects. The young man led a quiet, calm life. He spent whole days sitting in his room, reading blueprints, designing something in an engineering program on an old laptop. The guy crawled out of his hiding place only to have a snack. By the way, Andrew was not shy about his family. He quickly realized that he was a kind of instrument of revenge in the hands of the famous ex-husband of the hostess, and this fact greatly puzzled Andrew. He behaved quietly and seemed to even feel a sense of guilt in front of all the Helens of the family. Although, of course, he was not to blame for anything. The guy was given a separate shelf in the refrigerator, and Andrew used it exclusively, saying what kind of food the boy had. Helen was perplexed how he had not yet died of hunger or a stomach ulcer. Bread, ketchup, cheap sausage, sometimes some yogurt or cookies. In the end, a woman took pity on the guy. Her maternal heart could not stand it, and one day she simply invited him to dinner. Helen was just frying chicken legs with potatoes and making a salad. Mind-blowing aromas spread, of course, throughout the house. Helen imagined a hungry student drooling in her room, and it made her feel uneasy. And in general, you finally need to find out more about the person with whom you live side by side. And some kind of relationship with him must be maintained. After all, they live in the same house. Andrew initially refused. Helen understood the reason perfectly. The young man was very shy, but hunger still took its toll. It turned out that the guy was raised only by his mother. She worked as a cleaner in a village store. No education, no special ambitions. How could such a rural and, in general, not distant woman have such a talented son capable of science? Perhaps it was all about the boy's father. What's his name? Who is he? Andrew did not have any information about his parent. Of course, at one time he asked his mother questions, but she always avoided answering. It was obvious that it was difficult for the woman to remember this. That's why Andrew fell behind her. Why torture your mother in vain? When the time comes, she will tell you herself. She won't keep this secret forever. The mother adored her only child. She tried to give him everything she could. For the sake of her son, the woman worked several shifts and saved money for the education of her heir. She immediately realized that she had got a real treasure. No one else in their village had such children. Andrew spent his entire childhood in the village. The boy was very different from the local kids. He was always attracted by the lines and silhouettes of buildings. He drew a lot. He wanted to come up with some special house. The best gifts for Andrew were paints, good pencils, and albums, a strange hobby for a village boy. Andrew's peers mostly played football. They kicked the ball on the field outside the outskirts from morning to evening. Andrew, on the other hand, remained indifferent to everyone's fun and generally made few friends with anyone. The local kids didn't understand him. Well, he accordingly, and then. It was hard for the boy, especially in adolescence, when it is so important to spend a lot of time surrounded by friends. Andrew simply didn't have them. He felt lonely, strange, unwanted. Drawing saved me from sad thoughts. Andrew, having finished with the obligatory household chores, locked himself in his room and created. He drew buildings, villages, modern cities, came up with outlandish structures, then improved them, and time flew by unnoticed while he worked. Glennip's mother, coming home from the evening shift, often found her son falling asleep right at the table over the next drawing and smiled. She knew, she felt, Andrew had a great future ahead of him. And I told my boy about this more than once. Andrew is lucky. One day, his art teacher became interested in his workload. She saw them by chance. The sheets fell out of Andrew's folder and he feverishly began to collect. What is this? The teacher picked up one of the drawings and brought it to her slightly myopic eyes. Andrew thought that he would now be scolded for being distracted in class instead of drawing the assigned still life for 45 minutes. He became fascinated again with his fantasy cities. Sorry, the boy stammered. For what? The teacher was surprised. Of course, I saw that you draw well, but these are just some kind of masterpieces. Will you show me? Andrew nodded readily. Previously, only his mother had seen his work. The boy was a little embarrassed to show the drawings to the teacher, but she sincerely admired Andrew's creations, inserting some comments from time to time. This teacher's nephew, her sister's son, studied in the city to become an architect. The woman asked Andrew to lend her some drawings to show them to specialists. Of course, I could be wrong, but it seems to me that you have a rare gift. I want my nephew to look at your drawings and maybe show them to someone at the university. Such talent should not be wasted. This is how Andrew's gift was discovered. The student, of course, immediately recognized the talent of the village boy, as did his teachers. Now Andrew was supervised by professionals. The boy often took part in competitions and almost every time he took prizes. Andrew, then an 8th grader, had already been accepted into the prestigious Faculty of Architecture in advance. All that remained was to finish school. And so, after finishing 11th grade, The guy was accepted into the local architectural university without exams. The teacher's nephew, Pasha, who became Andrew's friend over the years, advised him to enter the capital's university, but the boy assessed his capabilities perfectly. He would not have managed financially in the capital. In the outback, he had chances for an acceptable life. Moreover, the local administration awarded him a scholarship. Small, of course, but at least something. The mother, who dreamed of a bright future for her son, saved up some money so that Andrew could rent an apartment for the first time. And then he had to look for a job, because the guy's stipend would not be enough for rent and groceries. And his mother couldn't help him much. I would like to, but I've been earning pennies all my life. The guy understood that studying and working was difficult, but where to go? And then suddenly this option with a house turned up by chance. Andrew couldn't even believe his eyes when he saw the ad, but having met Max, the boy realized the offer was quite real, although of course I immediately noticed that something was not right in this story, but there was neither time nor opportunity to speculate. So the young student became the owner of part of a large house. Andrew decided that it was fate, Helen recalled. Fate itself helps him achieve his goal. After all, if he had not found such cheap housing, he would not have been able to devote himself entirely to his studies and, accordingly, would not have achieved such high results. Who knows, maybe it really is fate. At that very first dinner together, Helen realized that Andrew was an amazingly kind and modest person. He was in a very difficult situation. He did not have enough stipend for nutritious food. His mother could not help him. The boy tried to earn extra money, but his studies suffered from this. Employers needed a person who could devote at least 4 hours to work. When to study? Helen's heart sank with pity when she saw sleepy Andrew and offered him a way out. He had to take Mary to robotics 3 times a week and Stephen to chess school. For this, I promised to feed him breakfast, lunch and dinner for free and invite him to the table with the whole family. I just didn't feel sorry for a bowl of soup for him, but Andrew would definitely not agree. Shared meals brought Andrew and Helen's family even closer together. He became very friendly with Stephen and Mary and became their older friend. Andrew enjoyed playing chess with Stephen and helping design robots. Both son and daughter were delighted with their new neighbor. Both quickly became attached to him. Andrew really liked Andy too. The men talked for a long time, discussing various topics. Tellingly, they had similar opinions on many issues. The guy tried to help his neighbors in everything. There was no need to ask him. In the end, everyone got so used to him that they began to consider him a member of the family. And then suddenly, disaster struck. Andrew was already in his 4th year of study, with just a little time left before graduation. He saw that his mother tried for him, stretched with all her might, and he really wanted to thank her to make her life happy, comfortable, bright. Take mom to the sea, where she has never been, go to an expensive restaurant, buy her beautiful clothes, and there was nothing left until this happy moment. Andrew knew that as soon as he received his diploma, he would immediately receive a good job offer. Yes, they have already done so. True, they are still unofficial. However, Andrew started earning money while still a student and even managed to transfer some money to his mother. But the main thing is that success was still ahead. Andrew's mother did not live to see this moment. Helen was obviously trying to hold back her tears. A neighbor called Andrew and told him terrible news. Andrew's dearest person died of a heart attack. It is unknown how Andrew would have survived this blow if Helen and Andy had not supported him. The guy became isolated and stopped learning to take care of himself. He hardly ate. Nothing had worried the cheerful and curious young man before. He would lie on his couch all day and just stare at the ceiling. We were always close, said Helen. They supported him, provoked him to talk, to give him the opportunity to express his emotions. I forced Andrew to eat. Otherwise, he probably would have died of hunger. Andrew became very thin and pale. Slowly, the guy came to his senses. Of course, it took him a long time to recover from the stress and get used to a life in which his dearest and most beloved person was not there. But at least I started eating and returned to university. Helen realized that everything would be fine with him now and breathed a sigh of relief. During this period, I was really afraid that he would do something to himself. Andrew didn't look like himself. You won't believe it. Several times during the night, I walked past his room and listened. You are a very kind and good person, said Max. Helen was confused. Time passed. Andrew became his old self again and took up his textbooks. Now he could again be seen sitting at his desk with a ruler and pencil in his hands over a divided sheet of Whitman paper. Andrew devoted a lot of time to his studies and also participated in competitions. One day, a young talented architect won a grant for his first real project of arranging an ordinary house and the surrounding area. It was a huge competition. The guy had to compete with experienced architects, and yet he won. The sponsor allocated a lot of money. Of course, Andrew took on the project with enthusiasm. It was as if wings had grown behind his back. The talented young man chose the very house in which he lived as his object. Andrew took into account the wishes of all family members. The household gathered around a round table and held a kind of meeting. Everyone took turns speaking out. Andrew was making notes in his diary. Helen dreamed of a swimming pool. Andy dreamed of a combined house and garage. The children wanted beautiful fountains and a sports ground. It was not easy to combine all these applications into one harmonious project. But Andrew didn't like primitive tasks. As a result, our house was transformed. Helen shared her memories. Now he has become the way you see him. Andrew completed it in record time and won the competition. After that, offers rained down on him from all sides. Andrew has just graduated from and there's already a high demand for his services. At first, the guy was even confused by the abundance of orders. Andy helped him figure it out. Together they built some sophisticated tables, weighed all the pros and cons, and weeded out projects that were not worth taking on. Now Andrew was often away from home. He had to work in different cities and even abroad. The whole family missed him during these periods. Andrew always returned from trips with gifts and vivid impressions. He grew up literally before our eyes. The guy turned from a poor student into a wealthy man. There was now a lot of money in his accounts. He could afford to buy a house anywhere in the country or even move somewhere in Europe. But Andrew didn't want to change anything in his life. The guy got used to a family that supported him during a difficult period. They all became like family. And then Andrew met his fate. Helen smiled. He fell in love with a girl from a neighboring town. And so our boy separated and flew out of the nest. Of course, when leaving the house, Andrew gave its inhabitants a gift. He rewrote his part to Helen. Now she has become the sole owner of the beautiful house and grounds. The guy himself bought a spacious apartment for himself and his wife. We often call each other and go to visit each other. Helen continued to tell. Now Irina is studying and Andrew is looking after her. I feel calmer this way. You gave us all a huge gift when you sold your part of a house to him. I tried to tell you this, but you... The story was interrupted by a little girl, a baby about 4 years old. She ran into the hall and, seeing a stranger, froze, batting her eyelashes in confusion. Nice girl. Just 2 braided pigtails, a nose, plump lips in a bow, rosy cheeks. She must have just woken up from a nap. Zhenya, hello. The girl stammered, remembering politeness, and then completely out of etiquette. And who are you? Max was confused. How would he introduce himself to this little girl? Don't explain to the little one that he was there. And her mother's husband. Apparently, this is our friend. Helen smiled at the girl, or never did. The little girl said thoughtfully. The news that his ex-wife had become a mother again shocked him for some reason. Helen laughed loudly. You should have seen your face, she said, pulling herself together. No, Anne is not our daughter. Andy and I were planning a child, but it didn't work out. This is Andrew's child. He and his wife were flying to a conference in France. There is no place for the girl there, and her parents have no time for her. They will have enough of their own to do. So Anne is visiting us, and we are glad. She is like a granddaughter or niece to us, a wonderful child. Max and Helen talked for several hours straight. They remembered the past and discussed the children. Helen was genuinely interested in Max's new life. Having learned that he had 2 twin daughters, she was completely delighted and urgently demanded to see their photo of the baby. Be sure to come and visit us with them. These are sisters Irina and Stephen. They need to know each other. Now we will communicate, right? All grievances and misunderstandings are behind us. Max nodded. Next to Helen, he felt calm and relaxed. It seemed that everything was not so complicated and confusing. The weight that had been placed on my shoulders all these years seemed to evaporate. Of course, there is still a lot of work ahead. You need to get to know your older children again and somehow explain your behavior to them. But the main thing is that Helen is on his side. She does not harbor any grudge against her ex-husband and sincerely wishes that peace and tranquility reign in their now such a large family. Anyone else in her place would be gloating now. I wish I had turned the children against the careless hubby. How lucky he was to have her. He played a significant role in this whole story. You should definitely thank him on occasion. Stephen will arrive soon. Helen looked at Max, who was even sweating on his back. Will he really see his son now? What to tell him? How to start a conversation? It seems that the man came here precisely to meet the children. So why now, when it is just around the corner, do you want to run away as far as possible again? I'm a little worried, the man admitted. I understand, but there is no need to worry. Helen covered her ex-husband's hand with her hand. Everything will be fine. And then the woman practically, quote, as long as we are alive, it's not too late to fix anything. The main desire